Son Chae-rin pulled the copper pin from Ihyeong's bandaged hand so slowly that the stumps of his two missing fingers twitched with phantom pain. It was a returning veteran's pin. His mother had embroidered one just like it with blue thread when Ihyeong was 7. Now, Chae-rin twirled it in front of his cousin's face and smiled with such condescension that he wanted to knock out his teeth with his left hand. But his left hand was holding a scroll. The scroll renouncing his inheritance that Ihyeong had just signed. The training yard of the Azure Fang Guild was bathed in the light of dawn. 112 fighters had gone into the abyss 3 years ago. 4 had returned. Ihyeong returned as captain of the 8th Vanguard with an A rank and 2 fewer fingers on his right hand. And now he stands in the same courtyard where they saw him off, listening as his uncle reads out his assignment. Overseer of the Ashes Quarter. For life. His uncle didn't even look up at him. Son Chae-rin, his cousin, the new master of Azure Fang. Rank S, in a new cloak with a silver clasp. The cloak smells of fresh paint because it was sewn yesterday. Yesterday, when Ihyeong was still sleeping in the infirmary after a 3-year raid and didn't know that his inheritance had already been given away. Chae-rin said that Ihyeong was a hero. He said the registry wouldn't accept a cripple as a commander. He said the post would be a worthy one. The worthy post turned out to be a district beyond the wall on the outskirts of the capital, Songgyeon, where once a month they deliver rotten rice and haul away corpses. Ihyeong's core had officially been extinguished. 2 lost fingers and 3 cracks in his vertebrae. The Imperial Registry assigned him rank F. Yesterday A. Today F. The Hex system has no tolerance for damaged bodies. The core resonates with the skeletal framework, the nerve nodes, and the paired limbs. Break one link, and the chain snaps. So says the Empire. So it is written in every textbook of every academy in each of the 12 dominions of the continent of Yenchu. Ihyeong knew these rules by heart. He had spent 3 years killing in the abyss according to these rules. And now the rules had killed him. Guards approached from both sides. 2 C-rank fighters. They did not look him in the eye. A month ago, they had called him captain. They led him through the main gate. Not through the side exit. Not through the service passage. Through the main gate at the hour of the morning reception, when all of Sonryon's nobility gathers on the gallery. Chae-rin had arranged the route. Ihyeong walked and listened. That very same Son Ihyeong, captain of the 8th. 3 years in the abyss, and he returned like this. Poor fellow. Someone uttered the word, empty, and there was a giggle nearby. Empty. Konja. A brand for those whose core has gone out. For the lame, the armless, the blind, the shell-shocked. For all those whom the Imperial Registry has declared useless and sent to live out their days in the Quarter of Ashes. A woman in blue silk laughed into her fan. Softly, gracefully, the way people laugh at another's misfortune, when that misfortune is far enough away not to soil their sleeves. Ihyeong remembered the sound. He didn't turn around. His back was straight. His stride was steady. The stumps beneath the bandages burned, but he kept his arm close to his body, and his fingers didn't tremble. The 3 fingers he had left. A livestock wagon was waiting outside the gates. Not a closed carriage. Not a horse. A cart with wooden sides and the smell of manure. Ihyeong sat down. A guard slammed the side panel shut. The cart set off down Sonryon's main street, and everyone who passed saw the former captain of the 8th Vanguard sitting amid the straw. By noon, the cart had left the central ring. The houses grew lower. Stone gave way to clay. Clay gave way to mud. The wall of the Quarter of Ashes rose on the horizon, gray and crooked. An old man with no left leg opened the gate. He looked up at Ihyeong and asked if he was the new warden or the new corpse. Ihyeong jumped down from the cart and said he hadn't decided yet. The Ash Quarter. 2,300 people behind the wall. Former soldiers, healers, artisans, scholars. All with broken bodies. All with a core rating of F or lower. All written off. Ihyeong walked down the main street, if you could call it a street. Mud. Rags hanging on ropes. Children with empty eyes. A man with no arms sat by the wall, counting the cracks in the stone. A woman with a scorched face dragged a bucket of water, a bucket that weighed more than she did. Ihyeong looked at them and saw what no one else saw. A pearl in his spine. A black pea the size of a pinky fingernail embedded in his third lumbar vertebra. A gift from the archivist of the Bone Era. The creature was dying during the final hours of the abyss and had driven that pea into Yihen's back with its claw before crumbling into dust. The Register of Emptiness. That's what the creature called it. Yihen didn't understand it then. Now he was beginning to. A number glowed above the armless man. Yihen blinked. The number didn't disappear. A letter and a number. Potential B, according to a system that hasn't existed for 1,000 years. The old system. The system of fractures. Kel. Not the core, but the fractures. Not the wholeness of the body, but its cracks. The more broken the body, the wider the channel for a different flow of qi. The Empire destroyed this system 1,000 years ago, erased it from the books and from memory. Because according to this system, the empty ones are stronger than the whole ones. Yihen walked down the street, and numbers glowed above every head. B, C, A, B. One was brighter than the others. A boy of about 16 sat on a step, holding a broken sword in his hands. The boy's eyes were closed, not from fatigue. He had no eyes. They had been burned out. Scars from the ritual radiated from his empty eye sockets to his temples. The number SS glowed above his head. Ihyeong stopped. The boy raised his head at the sound of footsteps. He asked who had come. Ihyeong replied that he was the new warden. The boy said that the last warden had hanged himself a week ago. Ihyeong said he was in no hurry. He sat down beside him. He looked at the empty eye sockets, at the SS symbol, at the broken sword. Yoon Do-hae, 16 years old, a former student of the Nine Blades Academy, expelled after a ritual that was supposed to strengthen his core, but instead burned out his eyes. Official rank? F. Actual potential? SS, according to a system the world has forgotten. Ihyeong looked at his right hand. 3 fingers and 2 stumps under a bandage. He looked at Do-hae. Then he looked at the quarter of ashes. 2,300 broken people. 2,300 fractures, each of whom he could set ablaze. Somewhere in the center of Songryeon, Song Chae-rin is now putting on a new master's cloak and clipping someone else's copper badge to her belt. Ihyeong will return by the same road, and each of them would count down the seconds until it was their turn to speak. Yoon Do-hae hadn't slept for 3 days because every time he closed his empty eye sockets, he dreamed of the ritual's flames. Ihyeong found this out on the second morning. The boy was sitting in the same spot on the same step, holding the same broken sword. Not because he was waiting, but because he had nowhere else to go. Ihyeong sat down beside him and began to speak, not to comfort, but to explain. He said that another system of power existed, one 1,000 years older than the core. He said that, according to this system, Do-hae's blindness was not a curse, but a door. Do-hae remained silent. Then he asked why the overseer was telling this to a cripple of F-rank cripple. Ihyeong replied that Do-hae wasn't an F, that the number SS glowed above his head, and that he could prove it. The procedure turned out to be both simple and terrifying. Ihyeong placed 3 fingers of his left hand on the boy's forehead and directed a drop of qi to the spot just above the bridge of his nose. Right where Do-hae's eyes should have been. Right where the breaks were. 2 seared nerve nodes, 2 holes in what the Empire considered essential for power. The qi entered the fracture, and Do-hae screamed. Not from pain, from the fact that something he hadn't felt since the ritual flared up inside his skull. A surge. Not through the core, through the cracks, through the void where his eyes used to be. Energy surged through channels not found in any of the Academy's textbooks. Do-hae doubled over and clutched his temples. Ihyeong held him by the shoulders and counted the seconds. At the 23rd second, Do-hae exhaled and unclenched his fingers. The broken sword in his right hand hummed. It didn't tremble, it hummed. The metal resonated with the flow from the fractures like a tuning fork. Do-hae stood up. He swayed. He turned his head left and right. He couldn't see. His eyes were still gone, but he could feel. Every crack in the wall 30 paces away. Every movement of air from Ihyeong's breath. The outline of a cat on the roof 2 houses away. Ihyeong asked what he could sense. Doha replied that the world had become loud. Ihyeong nodded. The first brake had been activated. The pearl in his spine responded. A quiet heat in his third lumbar vertebra, and along with the heat came knowledge. Not words. Images. A diagram. A blueprint for a blade made of a material that doesn't exist in the imperial forges. A blade for the blind. Sharpened not by the edge, but by vibration. Archival memory. The pearl revealed the first technique from the lost knowledge in exchange for the first activated fracture. Ihyeong stored the diagram in his mind and turned his attention to the task at hand. The neighborhood needed everything. Food, water, a roof that doesn't leak. Protection from the imperial inspectors who arrive every 6 months for the purge and decide who to keep and who to discard. Ihyeong walked through the quarter in 2 days. He counted the people. 2,271. Not 2,300 as listed in the registry. 29 people had died in the last month, and no one had crossed them off the list. He started small. He appointed 4 elders to oversee different sectors. He distributed the water supplies. He found 3 people with construction experience. 1 was missing a leg. 1 was missing an arm. 1 had a shattered spine. Letters glowed above each of their heads. C, B, B+. Ihyeong ignited the second fracture on the 4th day. Baek Moo-hyun, 38 years old, former spear captain of the Imperial Guard. Lost both legs in the Battle of Gwangju. Discharged. Rank F. Potential S+. When the chi entered the breaks in his severed stumps, Moo-hyun didn't scream. He clenched his teeth so hard that the wooden armrest of his wheelchair cracked. Then he looked at Ihyeong and asked why. Ihyeong replied that he needed a commander. Moo-hyun said he had no legs. Ihyeong said that for what he had in mind, legs weren't necessary. Third fracture. Ihyeong, 29 years old, deaf and mute. Herbalist. Survived poisoning within her own clan. The poison destroyed her auditory nerves and vocal cords. Rank F. Potential SSS. Ihyeong wasn't even surprised. When the pearl displayed the SSS rating, he simply accepted it as a fact. The highest potential of anyone he had ever seen. In a deaf-mute woman who sat in a filthy barracks pounding herbs in a stone mortar. Activating her fracture took not seconds, but 2 hours. Qi flowed in slowly through her damaged auditory nodes and dead vocal cords. Ihyeong made no sound. She only clenched the edges of the table, and white spots appeared on her cheekbones. When the process was complete, the mortar in front of her cracked. Not from a blow. The herbs inside had begun to grow. Dry stems took root right in the stone. Ihyeong looked at her hands, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't hear herself crying. Ihyeong wrote 3 words for her on a scrap of paper. You are not empty. The 4th fracture. Chang Hae-bin, 22 years old. 1 hand. A scarred face. The daughter of a disgraced weaponsmith. A plus potential. She was the only one who asked not what this power was, but how it worked. Ihyeong replied that he'd explain once she built him a workshop. Hae-bin looked at him with her one good eye and said that a workshop required metal. Ihyeong nodded. Metal. Tools. Materials. None of these things existed in the quarter. The Empire only brought rice here, and even that was going bad. But the pearl had already slipped him a second blueprint after Moo-hyun's activation. A prosthesis. Not a wooden contraption on strings, but a real prosthesis made of bone and metal with channels for chi. To make it, he needed materials that weren't available in the quarter. Ihyeong looked at the wall. Beyond the wall lay Sonryeon. Beyond Sonryeon lay the 12 dominions. Beyond the dominions lay the Imperial Register, in which the Ash Quarter Guild ranked last, number 312 out of 312. He couldn't go beyond the wall. He couldn't buy the materials. He couldn't turn to merchants because no merchant would enter the quarter's gates. But he could wait. In 12 days, an imperial inspector would arrive for a routine inspection. He would be accompanied by an escort. The escort would be armed, and the weapons would contain metal. The pearl pulsed in his spine. 4 breaks were activated. His own rank had shifted slightly, not quite to E, not quite to D. A barely perceptible thickening of chi in the channels, from 1F to a slightly less dead F. But it had shifted. The system was working. The registry's resonance. The more activated voids there were around him, the higher his own rank. 4 was nothing, but 4 was a start. Ihyeong stood on the roof of the barracks and looked down at the quarter from above. Filth. Rags. People who had been written off. Above each of them glowed letters and numbers that no one but him could see. An army that the world had cast aside. Somewhere beyond the wall, Chae-rin was now having dinner with Ihyeong's fiancée, An So-hee, who had been transferred to Chae-rin's house a week after her exile. A copper badge gleamed on his belt. Ihyeong clenched 3 fingers of his left hand into a loose fist. He would return along the same road. The inspector arrived on the 13th day, 1 day later than scheduled. With him were 6 B-rank fighters in imperial armor and a cart loaded with paperwork for write-offs. The inspector's name was Kwon Chang-ho. He was fat, sweaty, with a measuring amulet around his neck that cost more than the entire Ash Quarter. The amulet displayed the rank of anyone within a 50-step radius. Kwon Chang-ho stopped at the gate and raised the amulet to his eyes. He smirked. Average rank of District F minus 0.3. He said this out loud. He said that even livestock had a higher rating. The 6 fighters laughed. They stood in a tight group behind the inspector and didn't even have their hands on their weapons. Why bother? The Ashes Quarter. 2,000 F-rank cripples. What could they possibly do to 6 B-rank fighters? Ihyeong stepped forward to greet them. He introduced himself as the overseer. Kwon Chang-ho looked at his right hand, at the bandages and the stumps of his fingers, and said that the Empire now appoints the empty ones as overseers over the empty ones. Witty. Then he unrolled the scroll. A scheduled purge. Every 6 months, the Empire conducts a purge. Anyone who can't work is written off. Written off means they're taken outside the wall and left on the road, without food, without water, without direction. It's called a merciful leave. Kwon Chang-ho read out the criteria. Those unable to move, those unable to hold a tool, those unable to speak to confirm their identity. Ihyeong listened and kept count. According to these criteria, 412 people were to be written off, including Do-hae, including Moo-hyun, including Yi-ryun. The inspector finished reading and looked up. He said the warden had 2 hours to compile a list. If the list wasn't ready, the escort would compile it themselves. Ihyeong nodded. He asked to show the escort around the quarter while he prepared the documents. He said the soldiers should inspect the eastern sector, because a wall had collapsed there and it needed to be documented for the report. Kwon Chang-ho waved his hand. 6 soldiers set off down the eastern street. The inspector remained at the gate and took out his thigh. Ihyeong approached the barracks where Do-hae was waiting. The boy stood by the wall with a sword. Not a broken one, a new one. Over the past 10 days, Ihyeong had remelted 3 rusty shovels and forged a blade based on the diagram from the pearl. Rough, crooked, but the metal hummed when Do-hae touched it. Ihyeong said one word. Ready? Do-hae nodded. He didn't smile. Blind boys in the Quarter of Ash don't smile before a fight. They just turn their heads at the sound and do what they know how to do. 6 B-rank fighters were walking down East Street, not looking around. Why bother? There's nothing but cripples here. One of them kicked a bucket by the shack. Another spat on the threshold. A third said it stank and that he wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. Do-hae emerged from the alley. A blind, 16-year-old boy with a sword made from melted-down shovels. The first fighter saw him and opened his mouth to say something funny. He didn't get the chance. Do-hae closed his empty eye sockets. He turned his head. He couldn't see them. He could sense them. 6 streams of chi. 6 B-rank cores. 6 points in space with precise coordinates. The first strike hit the nearest fighter in the throat. Not a slashing blow, but a stabbing one. The blade went in 2 fingers' width and came out. The fighter clutched his neck. The second strike. The third. Do-hae moved in a way that F-rank fighters don't. He moved in a way that even A-rank fighters don't. A body without eyes. A body with two breaches through which a stream of chi lashed from a system that doesn't exist. The fourth fighter managed to draw his sword. Do-hae heard the sound of metal against the scabbard. He shifted half a steps. The blade whizzed past his ear. His blade sliced through the fighter's wrist. The sixth fighter ran. Do-hae caught up to him in 3 steps. 11 seconds. 6 B-rank fighters lay on the ground on East Street. 4 were dead. 2 were unconscious, with wounds that would prevent them from wielding a weapon. Do-hae stood over them, breathing heavily. The shovel-blade sword was covered in blood up to the hilt. Ihyeong approached. He looked. He nodded. Then he walked toward the gate. Kwon Chang-ho was finishing his flask. He raised the amulet as Ihyeong approached. He looked at the number, F. He smirked and asked where the list was. Ihyeong said there wouldn't be a list. Kwon Chang-ho blinked. Then he laughed. Then he stopped laughing because he saw blood on the hand of the boy who had stepped out from behind Ihyeong. The inspector held the amulet up to Do-hae. The number on the amulet, F. Kwon Chang-ho looked at the amulet, then at the 6 men lying at the end of the street, then back at the amulet. F. The boy was pointing to F. 6 B-rank fighters lay in a pool of blood. The amulet showed F. Kwon Chang-ho's face went pale. Not from fear. It was because he didn't understand. His world operated on numbers. The numbers now said that F had killed 6 B-rank fighters. That was impossible. It didn't fit into a single line of the Imperial Registry. Ihyeong spoke evenly and without emphasis. He told the inspector to note in the report that the Quarter of Ashes had cooperated and that the fighters had died due to their own carelessness.
Kwon Chang-ho looked at him, at the boy, at the bodies, at the amulet. He took out a brush, he took out ink, and he signed. His hands were shaking so much that the character came out crooked. The inspector's carriage left an hour later, without a list, without a purge, with a report of an accident. Ihyeong stood at the gate and watched as the carriage grew smaller on the road to Songryeon. Behind him, the quarter let out a sigh. The 412 people who were supposed to leave behind the wall today remained. Moo-yeon rolled up in his wheelchair. He asked what would happen next. Ihyeong replied that the inspector would return. Not in half a year, much sooner. And he wouldn't bring just 6 B-rankers. He'd bring more. They needed to be ready. Moo-yeon nodded. Then he asked how Ihyeong knew the inspector wouldn't report the truth. Ihyeong replied that the truth in the report would be worse for the inspector than for the quarter. If Kwon Chang-ho writes that 6 of his fighters were killed by a blind F-rank kid, the inspector will be asked why he didn't check it out personally, why his escort let himself get killed, why he didn't call for backup.
Kwon Chang-ho would rather bite his tongue off than admit it. Moo-yeon snorted. It was the first time he'd done so since arriving in the quarter. Ihyeong didn't smile. He was looking at the bodies of the 6 fighters that hadn't yet been cleared from the street. The metal on their armor gleamed. Good metal. Imperial forging. Enough for the first set of prosthetics. Haebin was already walking toward the bodies with her tools. Habin hadn't slept for 4 days. The workshop. Ihyeong didn't know if that was the right word for a corner of the barracks with a dirt floor and a hole in the roof through which smoke seeped. Haebin hammered 6 hooks into the wall, hung up her tools, cleared a space for a stone anvil and began to work. With one hand. Her right hand had been burned to the bone as a child when her father was executed and the workshop was set on fire. She had her left hand left. With her left hand, she held the hammer, pliers, and file. A prosthesis made of pearls. The blueprint was complex. A bone frame. Metal joints. Inside, 3 channels for chi that were supposed to resonate with the owner's fractures. Haebin looked at the blueprint that Ihyeong had scribbled with a piece of charcoal on a board and said it was impossible. Then she asked where he'd gotten it. Ihyeong didn't answer. Haebin didn't ask again. She said they needed a special kind of bone, not human, not animal, but something denser. Ihyeong remembered. The 3rd level of the abyss. Bone trees. Harder than steel, but softer than diamond. He knew where to find such a bone. But he couldn't make it to the abyss. Not now. Not with an F rank and only 3 fingers on his hand. He found a substitute. An old man with no left leg lived in the quarter. The very same one who had opened the gate on the first day. His name was Nam Tae-ju, 71 years old, a former hunter of abyss creatures. He'd lost his leg 40 years ago, C-rank potential. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that the old man had a box under his bed. Inside the box were 5 third-level abyss bones. He'd kept them for 40 years, not to sell, for the day when someone would ask. Ihyeong asked. Nam Tae-ju took out the box, opened it, looked at the bones, looked at Ihyeong. He asked who they were for. Ihyeong said they were for Mu-hyun, for the legless spearman. The old man was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Take them." Haebin worked for 4 days and nights. Ihyeong helped. With 3 fingers of his left hand. He held the blank while Haebin filed it down. He held the channel steady while she poured the metal. He held it steady while she carved 3 grooves for the chi with a chisel. By morning on the 5th day, the prosthesis was ready. 2 rods made of abyss bone. Hinges made of imperial steel from armor. Leather fastenings. Inside, 3 channels exactly according to the blueprint. Rough work. The seams were visible. The rivets stuck out. But the chi flowed through the channels. Ihyeong checked them 3 times. Mu-hyung sat in a chair and looked at the prostheses. Not at his own stumps, at the prostheses. His face was stony. A former captain of the Imperial Guard who had commanded 1,000 soldiers at the Battle of Gwangju, who lost his legs when a third-level creature bit through his shield along with his legs, who had spent 3 years sitting in a chair, watching people walk by on 2 legs. Ihyeong didn't give a speech. He dropped to one knee and began attaching the prosthetics to the stumps. Straps. Tightening. Chi from Mu-hyun's fractures flowed into the prostheses channels. Slowly. Like water through a dry riverbed. Mu-hyun gripped the armrests. Then he released his grip. Then he stood up. The chair rolled backward. Mu-hyun was standing. The prosthetics creaked. The metal groaned under his weight. But he was standing. He took a step. Left leg. The bone rod sank into the ground with a dull thud. Right leg. Another thud. Mu-hyun took 5 steps and stopped by the wall of the barracks. He placed his palm on the stone. The wall cracked. Not from the impact, from the chi that flowed through his legs, through the fractures, through the channels of his prosthetics, and surged out at the point of contact. Mu-hyun looked at his palm, then at the crack, then at Ihyeong, a former captain of the Imperial Guard, rank F on the registry, S+ on a system that doesn't exist, wearing prosthetics made of abyss bones and imperial steel. He didn't say thank you. He said, "Give the orders." Ihyeong gave the orders. Over the next 3 weeks, the Quarter of Ashes changed. Not on the outside. The walls were the same. The filth was the same. The rice was just as. But inside, something shifted. Ihyeong activated the brakes every day. 2 at a time. 3 at a time. Carefully. Each activation drained his ki, and it took him half a day to recover. But the numbers kept rising. By the end of the first month, he had activated 14 brakes. Ihyeong's personal rank shifted from F to F+. Barely noticeable, but it had shifted. Mu-hyun was training the first group. 8 people. 3 without arms. 2 without legs. 1 without an eye. 1 without fingers on both hands. 1 with a shattered pelvis. All former fighters. All written off. All with glowing numbers above their heads. Mu-hyun pushed them hard from dawn on. He showed no mercy. He offered no comfort. He trained them just as he had trained the guards in Gwangju. They fell. They got up. They fell again. There weren't enough prosthetics to go around. Haebin worked non-stop. But one hand is just one hand. 2 prosthetics a week. No faster. Ihyeong understood that this wasn't enough. That you couldn't get very far on 14 brakes and 2 prosthetics. That Kwon Chang-ho was sitting in Songryeon, sweating with fear, and sooner or later someone would ask him questions about the 6 dead fighters. That Chae-rin would sooner or later hear about the quarter. Time was working against him. Ihyeong stood on the roof and stared at the wall. Beyond the wall lay Sonryeon. Beyond Sonryeon lay the world that had cast him out. The pearl pulsed. The 6th blueprint this month. A furnace. An alchemical furnace for potions made from herbs that Ihyeong grew with her bare hands, with her own hands from dry earth. Potions that restore qi. Potions found in no pharmacy in the empire because the recipes were erased 1,000 years ago. Ihyeong worked in silence. She always worked in silence. Not because she didn't want to speak, because she couldn't. But her hands spoke. The herbs grew faster beneath her fingers. Their roots dug deeper into the stone. Their stems reached toward the light through the holes in the roof. In the 3rd week, she brewed her first potion. A thick green liquid in a clay cup. Ihyeong drank it. Qi flared up in his meridians. For a second. For one brief second, he felt like he used to. Like in those days when his core burned at A rank and he led the 8th Vanguard into the abyss. The second passed. But it had happened. Ihyeong looked at him and waited. Ihyeong nodded. "It's working." She smiled. For the first time ever. The month was over. Ihyeong stood at the gate and counted. 14 activated fractures, 2 prosthetics, 1 workshop, 1 alchemical furnace, 8 fighters in training. The guild's rank in the Continental Registry was still 312 out of 312. Last place. But he no longer looked at the number at the bottom. He looked at the number that was supposed to be there in a year. Ihyeong clenched 3 fingers of his left hand. The copper badge on Chae-rin's belt. He remembered every second of that morning. Every step through the main gates. Every snicker from the gallery. The woman in blue silk and her fan. He remembered it all and would never forget. The caravan arrived at night. Not an imperial one. A merchant caravan. 3 wagons loaded with goods, guarded by 4 C-rank mercenaries. They had lost their way. The road to Sonryeon's southern gate had been washed out by the rain, and the caravan leader had taken a wrong turn. Ihyeong was standing at the quarter's gate when the first wagon emerged from the fog. The caravan leader saw the wall and cursed. He asked where the southern road was. Ihyeong pointed in the right direction. The caravan leader nodded and began turning the oxen around. Then he stopped. He looked at the wall, at the gate, at Ihyeong. He asked if this was the Quarter of Ashes. Ihyeong confirmed it. The caravan driver spat and said he'd heard of this place, a dumping ground for cripples. Then he cracked the whip on the oxen and drove off. Ihyeong watched him go. 3 wagons, cloth, grain, metal. All of it passed by within 20 paces and drove off. He memorized the direction. He memorized the route. He memorized the time. This wasn't the first time caravans heading for the southern gate had passed through here. The road was well worn. They would be coming back. A week later, a second caravan arrived. 5 wagons, larger ones, stronger guards, 6 mercenaries, 2 B rank, 4 C rank. This time, the caravan leader didn't get lost but set up camp by the wall for the night. It was more cost-effective than paying for a parking spot at the Sonryeon gate. Ihyeong went out to meet him. Not as a caretaker, as a merchant. He offered water from the quarter's well and a spot under the awning in exchange for 2 sacks of grain. The caravan leader laughed. Then he looked up at the sky. Rain. Cold autumn rain. The awning in the quarter was better than a wet tent. He agreed. 2 sacks of grain. The first trade in the history of the Quarter of Ashes. Ihyeong didn't stop there. He offered the caravan driver something else. Ihyeong had brewed a potion for travel fever, a disease that strikes travelers every fall. Sonryeon's pharmacies sell the medicine for 20 silver coins. Ihyeong offered it for 5. The caravan driver didn't believe him. He tested it on one of his men who had been coughing for 2 days straight. 2 hours later, the cough was gone. The caravan leader bought 10 vials, 50 silver coins. In a single night, the quarter earned more than it received from the empire in 3 months. With that money, Ihyeong sent Muhyeon to the market, not to Sonryeon, but to the roadside market on the southern highway, where they don't ask for documents or check hallmarks. Moo-hyun rode in a wheelchair. He hid the prosthetics under his cloak. At the market, he was a cripple in a wheelchair. No one paid any attention. He bought 30 pounds of iron, 10 pounds of copper, leather for straps, tools. He returned by nightfall. Haebin unwrapped the bundles. Her good eyes sparkled.
She said she could now make 4 prosthetics a week.
Ihyeong nodded. Acceleration. By the end of the second month. 22. Brakes activated. Ihyeong's rank, F+. Guild 312. Moo-hyun had already trained 20 fighters. 7 had prosthetics. The rest were training without them. Ihyeong was brewing potions. Do-hae trained 10 hours every day. His control was growing. If on the first day he could sense 30 steps, now he could sense 200. He could hear breathing through stone walls. He could distinguish chi ranks by their vibrations. B rank sounded like a copper bell. C rank like a clay pot. F rank like silence. He hadn't heard of an A rank he hadn't heard yet. Ihyeong wouldn't let him slack off. Every evening he would sit down beside him and talk. Not stories, tactics. How the fighters of the Nine Blades Academy moved. What stances, what combinations, what weak points. Ihyeong had fought alongside the continent's best warriors for 3 years. He knew their weaknesses better than their own teachers. Do-hae listened and absorbed it all. In the third month, what Ihyeong had both expected and feared happened. A messenger from Sonryeon. Not an imperial one, a guild member.
A C-rank fighter in a cloak bearing the Azure Fang emblem.
He rode up to the quarters gates and tossed a scroll over the wall without dismounting. Moo-hyun picked it up, unrolled it, read it aloud. An official notice from Son Chae-rin, master of the Azure Fang Guild. A request to inspect the living conditions in the Quarter of Ashes due to reports of violations of sanitary standards. The inspection is scheduled for 14 days from now. Moo-hyun looked at Ihyeong. He said that Chae-rin had heard the news. And Ihyeong read the scroll again. Between the lines. Sanitary standards. That means someone ratted them out. Inspector Kwon Chang-ho. Not directly. Through a third party. Chae-rin isn't a fool. He wouldn't act on rumors. So he checked it out. So he knows the inspector's escort is dead. So the issue isn't the sanitary standards, but the fact that the cousin he exiled has started building something behind the wall. 14 days. An inspection of the Azure Fang Guild isn't just an inspector with 6 fighters. It's a squad. 20 fighters at a minimum. Half of them are B rank. A few are A rank. Maybe Chae-rin himself will come. S rank. Ihyeong assembled a team of 4. Moo-hyun, Do-hae, Ihyeong, and Haebin. They sat in the barracks by the light of an oil lamp. Ihyeong spread out a map of the quarter on the floor. He pointed out the walls, the gates. 4 weak spots where the wall was lower. 2 underground passages he'd found during the second week. A drainage ditch leading out to the southern road. Moo-hyun studied the map with the eyes of a tactician. For 20 years, he'd been planning the defenses of fortresses and garrisons. The Quarter of Ashes wasn't a fortress. The walls were flimsy. There was only one gate. Out of 2,000 people, only 20 could actually fight. Moo-hyun said that in open combat, they'd last a minute. Ihyeong replied that there would be no open combat. He asked Do-hae at what distance he could fight 5 opponents simultaneously. Do-hae thought for a moment and replied that if all 5 were B rank, then 30 paces. If one was A rank, then 10. Ihyeong nodded. He asked Ihyeong if she could brew a decoction in 2 weeks that would slow down the chi in the meridians.
Ihyeong wrote a single word on a piece of paper.
Yes. He asked Haebin if she could build a wall-mounted mechanism that would fire a prosthetic projectile 200 paces. Haebin said she could, but it would be a one-time use. Ihyeong said that one time would enough. Moo-hyun asked what the plan was. Ihyeong replied that they wouldn't defend themselves. They would conduct an inspection. They'll let Chae-rin in. They'll show him the quarter. They'll show him the filth, the rags, and the cripples. They'll show him exactly what he expects to see. And then, when he leaves and reports that there's nothing there, Ihyeong will submit the application. Movyeon asked what kind of application. Ihyeong pulled another scroll from his belt. It was blank, bearing the imperial seal he'd cut from the dead inspector's documents. An application to register a guild. Movyeon stared at the scroll, then at the seal, then at Ihyeong. He said it was madness, that the Void Ones had no right to register a guild, that the registry wouldn't accept an application from F-rank members. Ihyeong replied that there was no clause in the Empire's charter prohibiting the Void Ones from forming a guild. There is a clause regarding the minimum number of members, 10. There is a clause regarding the minimum combined rank, F times F equals F. Formally, the application will be accepted. Chaerin arrived in person. Not in 14 days, but in 11. He apparently decided to catch them off guard. 22 fighters, 8 B rank, 12 C rank, 2 A rank fighters flanking the Magister as bodyguards. Chaerin himself wore a silver cloak with a fang-shaped clasp, S rank. Ihyeong sensed him even before the gates opened. The pearl in his spine rang out faintly and unpleasantly, like a string under a fingernail. It was reacting to powerful cores. The S rank felt like pressure in his temples. Ihyeong stood at the gates, alone, in the gray cloak of a warden. 3 fingers of his left hand were clasped behind his back. His right hand, bandaged, hung at his side. Chaerin dismounted. He looked down at his cousin, even though they were the same height. It was the gaze of a man who knew exactly which of them was worth more. An S looking at an F. Number against number. Chaerin said that he looked unimportant. Then he surveyed the wall. He touched the stone. The stone crumbled under his fingers. He smirked and said the walls were a good match for their master. Ihyeong remained silent. He let the squad through the gate. 22 fighters entered the quarter and took up positions as if in occupied territory. 2 A-rank soldiers stood on either side of Chaerin. The rest scattered through the streets. A search. Ihyeong pointed things out. Barracks, a well, a rice warehouse. People. Chaerin walked and watched. The cripples by the walls. The children with empty eyes. The old people without limbs. The measuring amulet around his neck flickered. F, 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 F everywhere. The average reading for the area flashed as a red dot at the bottom of the amulet, 0.4. Slightly higher than it had been with the inspector, but still below the threshold for a living being by imperial standards. Chaerin stopped at Ihyeong's shack. It smelled of herbs inside, but not potions. Ihyeong had warned Ihyeong 3 days earlier. She had hidden the stove under a layer of clay. She had decanted the potions into empty water jugs. On the table were only bundles of dry stems and a mortar for grinding. Just an ordinary herbalist. G. Deaf mute. F rank. Chaerin didn't even go inside. He waved his hand and walked on. Movyeon was sitting in a chair by the wall of the 3rd barracks. His prosthetic legs were hidden under a blanket. His legs were covered with rags. Just an ordinary legless cripple in a wheelchair. Chaerin walked past without even glancing. Dohei sat on the steps with his eye sockets covered, holding a stick in his hands. Not a sword, a stick. The sword lay in a pit under the barracks floor, wrapped in 3 layers of oiled cloth. Chaerin looked at the blind boy. He lingered on the empty eye sockets. He turned to Ihyeong and asked where this boy was from. Ihyeong replied that he was from the Academy of the 9 Blades. The ritual had gone wrong. Chaerin snorted and said that the academy churned out rejects just as badly as the Abyss. Then he walked on. He didn't see Bin. She was sitting on the roof of the corner barracks, watching the squad from above through a crack in the tiles. With her only good eye, she memorized the fighters' positions. An engineer's habit. Calculating stress points. The inspection took 2 hours. Chaerin returned to the gate. He stood in front of Ihyeong. 22 fighters stood behind him. The amulet around his neck displayed an F next to his cousin's name. Chaerin said he hadn't found any violations. He said that the Quarter of Ashes met the requirements. Then he leaned in closer. He lowered his voice. He said he'd heard some interesting rumors. That the inspector had lost 6 fighters in the quarter. That the report listed it as an accident, but that accidents don't kill 6 B-rank fighters at the same time. Ihyeong looked him in the eyes, without blinking.
With 3 fingers of his left hand, he gripped the edge of his cloak behind his back. His voice was steady. He said the fighters had gotten drunk and fought among themselves, that the inspector had confirmed it, that the report was signed and certified. Charon looked at him for a long time. Then he smiled. The same smile he'd had in the training yard when he'd picked up the copper badge. Sympathetic, warm, as fake as a copper coin in a dead man's pocket. He said he believed him, that he was glad his brother was doing well, that he would come to visit. Then he mounted his horse and led the squad away. 22 soldiers set off down the road towards Songrion. Ihyeong stood at the gate and counted the clopping of hooves until the last one faded away. Then he exhaled. Moo-hyun rode up. He asked if he believed it. Ihyeong replied that he didn't. Chae-rin didn't believe a single word. He hadn't come to verify anything. He'd come to look Ihyeong in the eyes and figure out what he was hiding. Now he knows that Ihyeong is hiding something. He just doesn't know exactly what. And that would gnaw at him. Moo-hyun asked how much time they had. Ihyeong replied that Chorin would submit a petition to the Imperial Council requesting the sanitary liquidation of the quarter. It would take 2 months to process. If the council approved it, they would send not 22 fighters, but 200. Not B rank, but A rank. 2 months. Ihyeong took out a blank scroll bearing the imperial seal. The next morning, Moo-hyun left the quarter in a wheelchair. Under the blanket were prostheses made of abyss bones. Under the seat of the wheelchair was a scroll containing the application for the guild's registration. The seal of the deceased inspector. Ihyeong's signature. 10 names. 10 F-rank members. Moo-hyun arrived at the Imperial Chancellery by the eastern gates of Sonrion. The official behind the counter looked at the legless cripple in the chair and asked what he wanted. Moo-hyun placed the scroll on the counter. The official unfolded it. He read it. He looked up. He read it again. Then he laughed. He asked if it was a joke. Moo-hyun replied that it wasn't. The clerk said that 10 F-rank members couldn't register a guild. Moo-hyun asked which clause of the charter prohibited this. The clerk opened the book. He flipped through the pages. Flipped through the pages. Flipped through the pages. He closed it. Opened it again. There was no such clause. A minimum of 10 members. There was one. The minimum combined rank. No. In the 1,000 years since the registry's inception, no one had ever imagined that F-rank members would want to form a guild. That's why no one had written a prohibition. The official looked at Moo-hyun. Moo-hyun looked at the official. Silently. Patiently. Like a man who had commanded the Imperial Guard for 20 years and knew how bureaucracy worked better than any bureaucrat. The official affixed the seal. Number 312 out of 312. The last spot in the Continental Guild Registry. The Islam Guild. Territory, the Quarter of Ashes. Leader, Sun Ihyeong. Rank, F. Moo-hyun returned by nightfall. He placed the sealed scroll before Ihyeong. Ihyeong unrolled it. He looked at the number. 312. He looked at the seal. Imperial. Genuine. From this moment on, the Quarter of Ashes is the territory of a registered guild. From this moment on, any inspection by any clan requires a decision from the Imperial Council. From this moment on, Charon cannot simply arrive with a detachment and carry out a sweep. He needs paperwork. And paperwork takes time. And time means the breaches. Ihyeong hung the scroll on the wall of the barracks. Next to the map of the quarter. Next to the prosthetic blueprints. Next to the list of 2,271 names. Dohei stood nearby. He asked what now. Ihyeong replied that now they were beginning, not to survive, to build. 3 months after exile, 27 activated fractures. Ihyeong's rank, D. The pearl in his spine glowed more and more frequently, not with pain but with warmth. Each new fracture was a new blueprint from the archival memory. Each blueprint was another brick in the foundation. Ha-bin's workshop had expanded from a corner of the barracks into a separate building. 3 furnaces, 2 presses, an anvil made of abyss stone that Nam Tae-ju had dug up from his second hiding place. The old man turned out to be quite the hoarder.
Hebin was making 6 prosthetics a week. Not 2, like in the first month. 6. Because she now had assistants. 4 apprentices from the quarter. All of them with disabilities. All with activated fractures. One was missing 3 fingers, but with the 2 he had left, he bent metal more precisely than another blacksmith could with 10. The prosthetics changed. The first ones were crude, creaky, with protruding rivets. The 20th prosthesis already looked different. A smooth frame, silent hinges, 5 channels for chi instead of 3. Hebin learned from each one. Ihyeong gave her the blueprints. She translated them into metal. A rhythm developed between them. He would come with a board on which a diagram was scratched. She would look with her good eye. She asked 1 question. 2. No more. Then she nodded and began to work. They hardly spoke outside the workshop, but every time Ihyeong left, Hebin would watch his back for a second longer than necessary. Moo-hyun was training 40 fighters. Not 20, as it had been a month ago. 40. Formation drills. Reorganization drills. 3-on-3 combat. Team combat. Blind combat. Do-hae personally led the last drill. The boy had grown in 3 months, not physically, but in his control. He could sense 400 steps in every direction. He could distinguish the chi rank down to 1/10 of a unit. He was now an A rank as... He described it as the rumble of a bell inside a bronze dome, low and heavy. He trained 20 fighters to fight without sight. He blindfolded them with rags and paired them up. The first few days they bumped into walls. After a week, they were hitting each other. After a month, they were fighting so fiercely that even those with sight couldn't keep up. These disruptions opened up other channels of perception, not just sight, not just hearing, but something third. A sense of the flow of chi all around them, like a fish sensing the current through its skin. Moo-hyun said he'd never seen anything like it in his 20 years in the guard. Ihyeong replied that the guard trained the whole, and the whole don't know how to sense the world through cracks. Ihyeong's alchemy workshop operated around the clock. 4 furnaces, 12 types of potions, restoring chi, accelerating regeneration, pain relief, slowing the flow of others, amplifying the resonance of the fractures. Contact poison, antidote, tincture for hardening bone prostheses. Ihyeong didn't speak. She couldn't hear. But she sensed the herbs the way Do-hae sensed space. Every root, every leaf, every fungal spore. The fractures in her auditory nodes opened a channel to something that Ihyeong could describe with only one word: life. She sensed the living, anything living. Plants grew 3 times faster under her hands. Potions turned out 3 times more concentrated. Ihyeong gave her recipes from the pearl, and she perfected them in silence and with intense focus. Trade with the caravans brought in a steady income. 2 caravans a week stopped at the walls of the quarter. Tea potions for fever, ointments for burns, tinctures for stamina. The caravan drivers paid in silver and asked no questions. Word spread along the southern route. The quarter of Ash had a herbalist who treated patients better than the pharmacies of Sonryon, at a quarter of the price. The caravan drivers told one another. By the end of the 3rd month, a line of 3 or 4 wagons was lining up at the gates. Ihyeong supervised every transaction. No weapons, no artifacts, only potions and ointments. Nothing that might attract the Empire's attention. The money went toward metal, toward leather, toward food. The Empire still delivered its rancid rice once a month. Now they dumped it into a pit and buried it. The neighborhood was eating properly for the first time in its 15-year history. Ihyeong could feel the air changing. Not the temperature, the mood. People who, 3 months ago, had been sitting by the walls waiting to die were now working, building, training. They'd acquired a word they hadn't had before: tomorrow. They were making plans for tomorrow. The cripples whom the world had written off had begun to think about the future. Ihyeong knew it was fragile. One attack, one sweep, one order from the Imperial Council, and it would all fall apart. The chain of debt. His rank was tied to each of the 27. If anyone died, he would lose a part of himself forever. 27 threads. 27 vulnerabilities points. With every new fracture, he grew stronger and weaker at the same time. Mukyeon once asked him about it. At night, on the roof of the barracks. Ihyeong explained. Not everything, just the gist. Mukyeong was silent for a long time. Then he said that any commander is bound to his people. Ihyeong replied that wasn't true. That when 400 guardsmen died in the Battle of Gwangju, Mukyeong lost his sleep and his legs, but not his strength. And Ihyeong would lose his strength too. Literally. Mukyeong looked at him. He said that meant one thing. You can't lose people. Ihyeong nodded. Exactly. At the end of the 3rd month, Chae-rin struck. Not personally, through intermediaries. 3 mercenaries from the Red Mountain Dominion, all A rank. They came at night, over the southern wall, quietly, professionally. Ihyeong was asleep when a sharp pain shot through his spine. He jumped up. 3 streams of chi beyond the wall. Powerful, hot, A rank. 3 of them. He didn't have time to reach the southern sector,
But Do-hye was already standing on the roof. The boy hadn't been sleeping. He'd heard them from 400 steps away. 3 bronze bells in the darkness. Do-hye descended from the roof without a sound. The first mercenary scaled the wall and stepped onto the quarter's ground. His sword was still sheathed. Do-hye struck upward from the shadows. The blade, fashioned from shovels, pierced beneath his ribs. An A-rank mercenary. A professional assassin. He didn't even scream. He slumped like a sack of stones. The second one scaled the wall and saw the body. He drew his weapon, a double-edged blade with serrated. Expensive. A rank. He struck where Do-hye had been standing a second ago. Do-hye shifted half a step to the left. The double-bladed sword sliced through the air. Do-hye countered. Not to the torso, to the wrist. The mercenary dropped his weapon and clutched his hand. Do-hye finished him off. The third one. The third one was smarter. He didn't climb over the wall. He struck the wall. The A-rank's chi slammed into the stone. The wall shook. Crumbs rained down. A second strike. A crack. A third strike. A breach. The mercenary stepped through the breach and saw before him not a blind boy, but a legless man on bony prosthetics wielding a spear made of rebar. Mukyeon. S+ under the old system, on prostheses that hummed with chi. The spear pierced the mercenary's shoulder before he could raise his guard. A rank versus S+. The fight lasted 4 seconds. 3 bodies. 3 A-rank mercenaries from the Red Mountain Dominion. Dead on the ground in the quarter of ashes. Ihyeong ran up just as it was all over. He looked at the bodies. Then at the breach in the wall. Then at Mukyeon. Mukyeon was standing on his prosthetics, breathing heavily. His spear was covered in blood. His face was calm. He said he'd missed this. Ihyeong didn't smile. He crouched down next to the third mercenary's body. A pouch hung from the slain man's belt. Inside the pouch was a contract, on thin paper. No client's name, but with a seal. A blue seal with a fang. The Azure Fang. Chae-rin. Ihyeong rolled up the contract and put it in his pocket. Then he looked south, into the darkness. Somewhere beyond the wall, beyond Songryeon, beyond his cousin's silver cloak. He said quietly, 3 A-ran grade targets. Next time there will be more. Ihyeong wasn't afraid. He was counting on it. Ihyeong submitted the contract bearing the Azure Fang seal to the Imperial Arbitration Court on the 4th day after the attack, not as a complaint, as a notification. Formally, the Break Guild notifies the Imperial Council of an attack by unidentified individuals using a forged seal of the Azure Fang Guild. Formally, the Break does not accuse, the Break informs. Chae-rin received a copy of the notification a week later. Ihyeong knew this because the day after receiving it, Chae-rin sent a messenger with a personal letter, not to the quarter, to the Imperial Chancellery. The letter demanded an immediate investigation into the forgery of the seal. Chae-rin claimed that the seal had been stolen, that the mercenaries had acted on their own initiative, that the Azure Fang had no connection to the attack on the territory of a registered guild. Ihyeong received a copy of the reply through his contact in the Chancellery, Not a spy, but a caravan driver. The very same caravan driver who had bought the fever potions. His brother worked as a scribe in the archives. The potions cost 5 silver coins.
The information cost more, but Ihyeong paid with the same thing: potions. Chiorin was nervous. That was a good thing. A nervous enemy makes mistakes. A calm enemy makes plans. Ihyeong preferred mistakes. The 4th month. 39 breaks activated. Ihyeong's rank, D+. Guild rank, 312 out of 312. His rank hadn't changed. To move up, you need points. Points are awarded for tournaments, for contracts fulfilled for the Imperial Bureau, for public missions. The Fracture Guild hadn't done any of that yet. Ihyeong waited. Not because he wasn't ready, because it was too early. Stepping into the public arena now would mean showing his hand. To show that the empty ones can fight. To reveal numbers that don't match the amulets. This would attract the attention of more than just Chirin. It would attract the Council. The Order of the Pure Core. Those who destroyed the fracture system 1,000 years ago and who would not allow it to return. Ihyeong had been waiting for 5 months. The activation of the fractures had not stopped. Every day, 2 at a time, 3 at a time. The pearl burned his spine and revealed new knowledge. A blueprint for a siege ballista.
A recipe for alchemical glue for bone joints. A diagram of an underground vault. A map of energy lines beneath the quarter of ash. The last one made Ihyeong freeze. Chi lines underground. Old. Ancient. Laid 1,000 years ago, before the Order of the Pure Core. The quarter stood at the intersection of 3 lines. It was no coincidence. It wasn't built here by chance. Someone 1,000 years ago knew that this place was special. Knew it and buried it beneath the walls for the cripples. Ihyeong descended into the underground chamber beneath the 3rd barracks. An earthen floor. Darkness. Dampness. He placed his palm on the stone and closed his eyes. The pearl in his spine flashed. The 3 lines of chi converged precisely beneath his palm. A node. A point of power. If activated, every fracture within the quarter's radius would be doubled in strength. Every prosthesis would resonate 3 times more powerfully. Every Ihyeong potion would last 5 times longer. Activating the node took 3 nights. Ihyeong worked alone. He channeled chi into the stone drop by drop. His D+ wasn't enough. It was critically insufficient. On the 2nd night, he asked Ihyeong for help. She descended into the dungeon. She placed her hands on the floor. Her SSS potential unfurled in the confined space like sails in a storm. The stone beneath her fingers cracked. Light poured out of the cracks. Not white, not gold. Black. Black light. A paradox. Light from the world's fractures. That very same stream from the great fracture at the base of the continent. The source that the Order of the Pure Core had sealed off 1,000 years ago. Sealed off, but not destroyed. Ihyeong pulled her hands away. She looked at Ihyeong. For the first time ever, fear was written on her face. Ihyeong placed his hand on her shoulder. He wrote in the dust on the floor with his finger. This is ours. The node activated at dawn on the 3rd night. Quietly. No explosion. No light. The air in the quarter simply changed. It became denser. Warmer. Ihyeong felt the chi in his channels shift. D+ became C-. Not from the activation of new fractures, from resonance with the node. Muyan woke up and said his prosthetics were humming differently. Louder. Clearer. Dohei woke up and said he could hear 600 steps instead of 400. Habin woke up and said the metal in the furnace was melting faster.
Ihyeong hadn't slept. She sat in the alchemy workshop and watched as the herbs on the table sprouted on their own. Without her hands, simply from the chi in the air. The Ashes district had become a different place. On the outside, the same walls, the same mud on the roads, the same number 312 in the registry. Inside, a power generator the likes of which hadn't been seen on the continent for 1,000 years. The 5th month. 53 breaches activated. Ihyeong's rank, C. Guild 312. Muyeon commanded 60 fighters. Bin produced 10 prosthetics a week. Ihyeong brewed 20 types of potions. Dohae trained 30 fighters without seeing them. Ihyeong decided it was time. The Imperial Bureau's first contract, a D-rank mission, clearing a small abyss fissure 2 days' journey from Sonryeon. A small fissure, first-level creatures, a dozen at most. Any C-rank guild could handle this in half a day. But the Break Guild isn't C-rank. Officially, it's an F-rank. Officially, not a single one of its fighters is capable of killing an abyss creature. That's why a D-rank contract is a statement of intent for them. Ihyeong submitted the application through the Chancellery. The official looked at him as if he were crazy. An F-rank guild taking on a D-rank contract. Technically, it's not forbidden. Any guild can take contracts 2 ranks above its own level. F plus 2 is D. The math adds up. The logic doesn't. The official stamped the paperwork. Ihyeong dispatched a squad. 10 fighters. Muyeon at the head. Dohae on the right flank. 5 swordsmen. 3 spearmen. 1 archer missing his left eye. All F rank according to the registry. All B through S plus under the old system. A small crevice. 12 first-level creatures. The squad entered at dawn. They emerged by noon. 12 creatures dead. 0 casualties. Mission duration? 4 hours. The average time for D-rank guilds is 8 hours. Ihyeong received the report that evening. Along with the report came points. The first points for the Islam Guild in the Continental Registry. The number shifted. 312 became 309. 3 positions. A trifle. Dust. But the number had shifted. For the first time ever, the number next to the name Islam had changed. Ihyeong stared at the scroll with the updated registry. 309. Then he looked at the wall where the old scroll with the number 312 hung. He took it down. He hung up the new one. 309. Muyeon stood nearby. He asked when the next one would be. Ihyeong replied, "Tomorrow." Dohae was on the roof, cleaning his sword. He could hear the conversation through the wall. He smiled. Down below, on the road to Sonryeon, a rider was galloping, fast. A messenger. Not into the quarter, out of the quarter, toward Chedin. One of the caravan drivers. Someone who had seen the Empty One's squad marching toward the Abyss Gorge and returning without a single scratch. Ihyeong knew that Chedin would find out. That was exactly what he was counting on. 6 contracts in 20 days. 2 D rank, 3 C rank, 1 B rank. Ihyeong took the last one in the 7th month, when the number of activated fractures had reached 89 and his personal rank had climbed to C+. A B rank contract, clearing a medium-sized crevice near the southern ridge. 30 second-level creatures and 1 third-level. Third-level creatures would kill A rankers if they went in unprepared. Ihyeong sent 20 fighters. Muyeon at the head, Dohae at the vanguard. Baek Muyeon, wearing prostheses made from abyss bones, wielding a spear that Bin had reforged 3 times until it stopped creaking on impact. A third-level creature emerged from the crevice at sunset, its shell made of black bone. 6 limbs, a maw with 3 rows of teeth. According to the Imperial classification, 1 A-rank fighter supported by 5 B-rank fighters. Battle duration, 20 minutes to 1 hour. Muyeon killed it in 40 seconds. The spear entered through a seam in the neck armor. The chi from the knee stumps traveled through the prosthetics, down the shaft, through the tip, and tore the creature apart from the inside. 40 seconds. The fighters stood in formation and watched. They didn't help. They didn't intervene. Muyeon handled it alone. S+ under the old system. A legless cripple on bone prostheses. He turned toward the formation. The creature's blood dripped from the spear. His face was calm, just like on the Imperial Guard parade ground 10 years ago, as if he had never lost his legs. The squad returned 3 days later. The report was sent to the Chancellery. Points poured in. The registry was updated. The Break Guild's ranking, 248, 61 positions for 6 contracts. The rate of point accumulation did not match the guild's rank.
An F-rank guild cannot complete B contracts in a quarter of the standard time. The officials at the Chancellery noticed. They made a note of it. They sent a request to the inspectorate. Ihyeong knew the inquiry would be sent. That was exactly what he was counting on. The 8th month. Charon stopped operating through mercenaries. He submitted a petition to the Imperial Council requesting the sanitary liquidation of the Shattered Guild's territory. The grounds? A discrepancy between the declared rank and actual performance metrics. Suspicion of falsifying contract reports. A demand for a full inspection involving representatives of the Council of 12. The petition was signed not only by Chae-rin. Elder Song Yeong-chol signed it as well. The clan chief, a member of the Council of 12. Ihyeong's uncle. The very same man who had read out the appointment to the Quarter without looking up. Now he had looked up. Now the Quarter of Ashes had become a problem, not for Chae-rin, but for the clan. Ihyeong received a copy of the petition via a caravan driver. He read it. He reread it. He set it down on the table. Moo-hyun was sitting across from him. He asked how serious the matter was. Ihyeong replied that the council would appoint an inspection in 2 months, not sooner. Bureaucracy moves slowly. But when the inspection team arrives, it won't consist of C rank or B rank fighters. It will be S rank. Possibly SS rank. Council members or their representatives. Equipped with next-generation measuring amulets. With the authority to eliminate on the spot. Moo-hyun asked what to do. Ihyeong replied that in 2 months, the Break Guild must be in the top 100 of the registry. Moo-hyun asked if that was possible. Ihyeong replied that they had 89 activated breaks. In 2 months, there would be more than 150. In 2 months, his personal rank would be B. In 2 months, Do-hae would be capable of facing an S-rank fighter alone. In 2 months, Moo-hyun would be able to kill a 4th-level creature. In 2 months, Haebin would have 100 prosthetics and 3 siege machines. In 2 months, Ihyeong will brew a potion that no alchemist in the Empire has seen in 1,000 years. In 2 months, they'll be ready. But first, they had to get through tomorrow. Because tomorrow, the first noble house was arriving. The letter had arrived the day before, on thin, watermarked paper. The No clan from the Blue River Dominion. A minor clan, not one of the 12. 200 warriors, mid-tier B rank. Clan head No Hyuk-chin. No Hyuk-chin had a son, No Jong-yun, 16 years old, born without a right hand. Core D. A disgrace by the clan standards. Useful but limited by the registry's standards. By the standards of the fracture system known only to Ihyeong. Minimum potential A+. The letter was polite. Too polite. The head of the minor clan wrote to the overseer of the Ashes Quarter with such deference as if addressing an equal. Word had gotten out. One of the caravan drivers had let it slip. Or one of the mercenaries had survived and told someone. Or an official in the Chancellery had noticed the impossible figures and whispered to the right people. It doesn't matter how. What matters is that the No clan asked to admit the one-armed boy into the Fracture Guild. They didn't order it. They asked. Ihyeong read the letter 3 times. This was the moment he had foreseen from day one. The nobility would start sending their defective children. Those they were ashamed to show at receptions. Those whose cores are dimmed by disabilities. Those rejected by the academies. They won't come out of charity. They'll come because they've heard that the Quarter of Ashes achieves the impossible. That cripples fight like A-rankers. That a blind boy takes down B-rank fighters. The nobility will come with children and money and the hope that Ihyeong will fix what they thought was broken. Ihyeong told Moo-hyun to accept them. Moo-hyun raised an eyebrow. He asked if it wasn't too early to let the nobility into the Quarter. Ihyeong replied that they needed the nobility. Not children, the nobility. Every clan that sent a child would become indebted to the break. Not formally, by honor. A clan that gives up its son cannot fight against the one who raises that son. Every child accepted is a shield. A political one, a living one. But Jung-yun arrived 2 days later. 16 years old. Quiet. Thin. His right sleeve was empty from the shoulder down. His eyes were downcast. a habit of hiding his disability, a habit of not looking people in the face because they were staring at his empty sleeve anyway. Ihyeong met him at the gate. He looked over the boy's head. A grade? A+. He nodded to the boy and said, "Welcome to Islam." But Jong-yun looked up. For the first time in a long while, someone hadn't looked at his sleeve first. Standing behind the boy was his father. But Hyuk-chin, the clan leader, B rank, a sturdy man with a stern face. He was looking at the quarter, at the walls, at the mud, at Moo-hyun on his prosthetics, at Do-hae with his empty eye sockets, at Hae-bin with her burned face. His jaw twitched. Then he looked at Ihyeong, former captain of the 8th Vanguard, former A rank, now F rank according to the registry, with 3 fingers on one hand. But Hyuk-chin bowed. He didn't nod. He bowed. The clan leader of 200 warriors bowed to the F rank overseer of the Quarter of Ashes. Ihyeong bowed in return, exactly to the same depth, no lower, no higher. But Hyuk-chin left. His son stayed. The first noble scion in the Break Guild, not the last. A week later, a second letter arrived. The Yeon clan. 10 days later, a third. The Park clan. A 16-year-old daughter, deaf in one ear following a botched ritual. A level potential. By the end of the 9th month, the guild had 12 noble offspring from 9 clans. 12 shields. 12 families who were now invested in the survival of the Quarter of Ashes. Yehen stood on the roof and counted. 114 activated breaks. Rank B-. Guild 174. 138 positions in 9 months. A figure that made someone in the capital look up and take notice. Somewhere in the Empress Regent's palace, all 312 numbers from the registry were floating in the air, and number 174 glowed slightly brighter than the rest. In the 10th month, Ihyeong stepped outside the wall for the first time, neither as a merchant nor as a supplicant. As the head of the guild ranked 174 on the Continental Registry, he was summoned to the Imperial Chancellery, an official invitation, not a summons, not an order, an invitation, bearing the watermark of the Council of 12. Moo-hyun said it was a trap. Ihyeong replied that it was worse than a trap. It was a procedure. The council was reviewing Song Gyeong-chol's petition to dissolve the Break Guild and had summoned both parties for a hearing. Ihyeong could have chosen not to appear. He could have ignored it. The council would have noted his absence and made a decision in his absence. The decision would have been the same. Dissolution. He went. Not in a cattle cart like 10 months ago. On foot. Through the same main gate. Along the same road. His left hand behind his back. His right hand in bandages. The gray cloak of a warden. 3 fingers and 2 stumps. Sonryeon hadn't changed. The same streets. The same houses. The same faces on the gallery. Someone recognized him. The former captain of the 8th, the very same one. The one who returned a cripple and went to the Quarter of Ashes. Ihyeong walked on without looking back. Just like 10 months ago. Only this time, he was walking not from the guild's gates but toward the gates of the chancellery, the hearing room. A long, columned hall. 12 chairs on a dais. Not all of them were occupied. 3 members of the council. Elder Song Gyeong-chol in the center. To his right, a representative of the Iron Peak Dominion. To his left, a representative of the White Pine Dominion. The remaining 9 had either sent a refusal or failed to respond. 3 out of 12. A quorum for minor hearings. Enough to decide on the dissolution of a guild ranked below the 100th place. Below, in front of the dais, are 2 seats. On the left is Ihyeong. On the right is Chae-rin. 10 months. They hadn't seen each other since that investigation when Chae-rin searched for evidence and found none. Ihyeong looked at his cousin. Chae-rin had changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. The silver cloak was the same. The fang clasp was the same. But something had appeared in his eyes that wasn't there before. Not fear, irritation. The irritation of a man who's squashing a fly, but the fly won't die. The copper badge was still on his belt. Ihyeong saw it, and his fingers beneath the bandage twitched. Elder Ihyeong began. His voice was steady, soft, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to without question. He read the petition aloud. The Break Guild, Ash Quarter Territory, Head Song Ihyeong, Rank F. Grounds for dissolution. Point 1. Discrepancy between the declared rank and actual performance metrics. An F-rank guild is carrying out B-rank contracts. Point 2. Suspicion of falsifying reports. Point 3. Threat to the public health of the Metropolitan District. Ihyeong listened, silently, hands behind his back, his face expressionless. When the elder finished, Ihyeong asked to speak. He was granted the floor. He stood up. He looked at the 3 chairs. At the uncle who had read him his sentence 10 months ago. At the 2 representatives who didn't know him and didn't care. Ihyeong said one thing. He requested a public audit. Not a closed inspection. A public one. In the Sonryeon Arena. With measuring amulets. With judges. With a record in the Imperial Scrolls. If the Break Guild failed to confirm its rank in the arena, Ihyeong would personally sign its dissolution. If it confirmed it, the petition for dissolution would be revoked. The hall fell silent. Chae-rin turned toward him. For the first time during the entire hearing, he looked him straight in the eye. His face twitched. Not out of surprise, out of understanding. Ihyeong was proposing a fight. Not in the shadows, not on paper. In the arena. In public. Where everyone would see it. Chae-rin opened his mouth to object. The elder raised his hand. Chae-rin fell silent. Elder Ihyeong looked at the nephew he had exiled, at the former captain, at the F-rank cripple. He remained silent for 30 seconds. Then he said, "I approve. A public trial in the Sonryeon Arena, in 30 days. The Shatter Guild would field 10 fighters. The opponent would be determined by a draw from among the guilds of the top 100. If Shatter won, the petition would be revoked and the guild would rise in the registry to the loser's place. If they lost, liquidation would be immediate." Chae-rin sat and calculated. Ihyeong watched his cousin count. A draw from the top 100. Azure Fang is ranked 23rd. The odds of the draw landing on them are 1 in 100. But Chae-rin knew that the draw could be bought, and Ihyeong knew that Chae-rin knew this. The hearing was over. Ihyeong left the chancellery. Sonryeong. The streets. The sun. He walked back along the same road. Through the main gate. Through the gallery. The same woman in blue silk was standing on the balcony. She looked down. She saw Ihyeong in his gray raincoat. She recognized him. She didn't smile. She turned away, quickly. Ihyeong noticed. He remembered. He returned to the quarter by nightfall. He gathered his 4 men, Mukyeon, Dohae, Ihyeong, and Haebin. He laid out a map of the Sonryeon Arena on the table. A circular arena, 200 paces in diameter. Sand. Stands for 15,000 spectators. The Imperial box at the top. Scrolls from the registry above the arena for all spectators. 10 against 10. Ihyeong said the draw would go to Azure Fang. Mukyeon asked how he knew. Ihyeong replied that Chae-rin wouldn't miss a chance to crush him in public. He'd buy the draw. He'd bribe the ringmaster. He'd do anything. Because Chae-rin is vain. It's not enough for him to have him eliminated through paperwork. He needs humiliation. He needs all of Sonryeon to see his crippled cousin lose in the arena. Mukyeon said that Azure Fang was ranked 23rd. 10 fighters ranging from A to S rank. At least 2 S-rank fighters, including Chae-rin. The rest are A and A+. Against 10 official F ranks from the Quarter of Ashes. Dohae sat on the floor, cleaning his sword in silence. Mukyeon asked if they could win. Ihyeong replied that in 30 days, he would have 150 activated fractures. In 30 days, his rank would be B+. In 30 days, every fighter in the squad would be twice as strong as the amulet indicated, and the amulet would still show an F. Mukyeon smiled slowly. Ihyeong did not smile. He looked at the arena map, at the sand, at the stands, at the box seats. Somewhere out there, Chae-rin would be sitting in a silver cloak, with a copper badge on her belt, watching as the numbers on the scrolls flickered out and lit up again. Ihyeong spoke softly. 30 days. 30 days. Ihyeong hadn't slept for the first 3 days. Not because he couldn't, because the pearl wouldn't let him. It spewed out blueprints one after another as if a dam had burst. Combat techniques for a blind swordsman in the confined space of the arena. A diagram for reinforcing prosthetics to withstand impact loads. A recipe for a potion that doubles the flow rate of chi through the fractures for 12 minutes. The formula for an alchemical coating for blades that destroys the core's standard defenses. Ihyeong wrote it all down, on boards, on the walls, on the floor. The 3 fingers of his left hand were cramping from the charcoal pencil. He wrote it down and passed it on. Haebin received the prosthetic blueprints and got to work. Ihyeong received the recipes and brewed the potions. Muhyeon received tactical diagrams and translated them into formations. Do-hee received training and practiced 20 hours a day, sleeping only 4. Ihyeong activated the breaches every day. 4 at a time, 5 at a time. A record. The pearl seared his spine until white spots danced before his eyes. Ihyeong poured a restorative potion into him, and he kept going. By the 10th day of 30, 131 breaks activated. Ihyeong's rank was B. Not B-, exactly B. The breakthrough happened at night. Ihyeong woke up because the chi in his meridians roared. It didn't flow, it roared. Like a torrent through a breached dam. His body jerked. 3 cracks in his vertebrae that had extinguished his core 10 months ago. 3 breaks. His own. He had activated others' breaks 130 times, but never his own. The pearl had done it for him. At 3 in the morning, on the dirt floor of a barracks in the Quarter of Ashes, Sun Ihyeong felt his spine ignite. Not the core, the breaks. 3 cracks through which the same stream entered him that had entered into every void he had ignited. He sat up, raised his right hand, looked at the 2 stumps under the bandage, bent them. The stumps bent. Not completely, not like fingers, but chi flowed through them for the first time in 10 months. The phantom pain vanished. In its place, a pulsation, warm, steady. Ihyeong clenched his right hand into an incomplete fist. 3 fingers and 2 stumps. His grip was weak, but it was there. He stood up. He went out onto the street. The neighborhood was asleep. Silence hung over the barracks. Only the hum of the power node underground. Ihyeong raised both hands. His left had 5 fingers. His right had 3 and 2 stumps. He struck out at the air. Chi flowed from both hands at the same time. His left as before. His right was weaker, half as strong. But it came out, for the first time. Muhyeon stood in the barracks doorway. He saw it. He said nothing. Ihyeong lowered his hands. He looked at the spearmen. Muhyeon nodded. Then he said it was time to pick the 10. 10 fighters for the arena. Ihyeong spent 3 days choosing. Not because he didn't know who to pick, because every fighter he chose risked his life, and every death in the debt chain took a piece of Ihyeong's strength away forever. He made his choice. Do-hee, Muhyeon, Haebin. Nam Tae-ju, the old man with no leg, the first ally. Sea-level potential, but as cunning as a fox in a henhouse. But Jong-yun, the one-armed boy from the No clan, A+ potential, 4 months of training. 3 swordsmen from Muhyeon's first squad, an archer without a left eye. Haebin, the spearwoman with a shattered pelvis, supported by prosthetics. 10. Ihyeong is the 11th, the captain. Officially, he's not on the roster. Officially, he's an observer. The arena rules allow the guild leader to step onto the sand only if the team has lost more than half its members. 6 out of 10. Ihyeong hadn't planned to step into the arena. He'd planned for Chae-rin not to survive past the 6th. The 20th day. Ihyeong received confirmation of the draw. A courier from the chancellery. A sealed scroll. The Shattered Guild's opponent in the public verification. The Azure Fang Guild. Rank 23. Ihyeong unrolled the scroll. He looked at the seal. He placed it on the table. Ihyeong was standing nearby. Ihyeong said the draw had been rigged. Ihyeong said he knew. Ihyeong said Chaerin would field her strongest fighters. 2 S ranks, 4 A pluses, 4 A ranks. Chaerin himself would go out last,
or first. His pride wouldn't let him hide at the end. Movyeon said that, according to the arena format, the fight would be 5-on-5 simultaneously. 2 substitutes on the bench. 1 captain each in the final if the score is tied. Ihyeong nodded. So, 5 fighters from the break against 5 fighters from the Fang. Then the second 5. Then, if necessary, captain versus captain. F versus S. The numbers on the scrolls above the arena represent the entire Sonryeon. Movyeon said that if Do-hae goes out in the first 5, the stands will see a blind boy cutting down A-rank fighters. The Ihyeong shook his head. He said that Do-hae would fight in the second group of 5. The first group must lose. Movyeon stared at him. Ihyeong repeated himself. The first group loses. On purpose. Slowly. Convincing. 5 F-rank cripples enter the arena and lose to 5 A-rank fighters from Azure Fang. The stands laugh. Chaerin smirks. The elder nods. Everything is going according to plan. The liquidation papers are already on the table. Then the second 5 take the field, and the world is turned upside down. Movyeon remained silent. Then he said that 5 fighters from the first 5 might be injured. They might die. Ihyeong replied that the first 5 would surrender before sustaining serious injuries. The arena rules allow it. A fight until loss of consciousness or surrender. 5 surrenders. The score is 5-0 in favor of the Fang. The second 5. 5 wins. The score is 5-5. The final. Captain versus captain. Movyeon asked who would represent Islam in the final. Ihyeong looked at him. Movyeon understood. The 28th day. Ihyeong stood on the roof of the barracks. Below him lay the quarter. 147 activated breakers. Rank B+. The day after tomorrow, the arena. The day after tomorrow, the Breaker Guild's first public battle. The day after tomorrow, the world will see numbers that don't add up. Ihyeong stared at the quarter's wall. Beyond the wall lay the road. He had left along that road 10 months ago in a cattle wagon. He would return along that road the day after tomorrow. On foot. Through the main gates. The pearl pulsed in his spine. Warmth. Not pain. Readiness. The Sonrin Arena. Morning. 15,000 seats, not a single one empty. The rumor that the Cripples Guild from the Quarter of Ashes had taken on Azure Fang had spread throughout the capital in 2 days. People hadn't come to watch a fight. People had come to watch a massacre. Entertainment. 10 F-rank disabled fighters against 10 fighters from the top 30 on the registry. The stands were buzzing. Bets were being taken at 10-1 in favor of the Fang, and no one was betting on the broken. Ihyeong entered through the arena's eastern gates. Behind him were 10 others, in identical gray cloaks. No armor, no emblems, no banners. The gray of the Quarter of Ashes. The stands fell silent for a second. Then they grew even louder. Look, that blind one over there, no eyes. And this one with no legs, on some kind of crutches. And that one's missing an arm. A woman, with a burn covering half her face. Are they serious? Laughter. Not malicious, indulgent, worse than malice. Ihyeong walked and listened. Every sound, every chuckle. He memorized it all. The West Gate. Azure Fang. 10 fighters in blue armor with silver trim. Chaerin in the lead. A silver cloak. A fang clasp. A copper badge on his belt. S rank. Behind him, 2 A+. 4 A's, 3 A-. 9 fighters and a captain. They marched out in formation. Precise. Beautiful. Just like a parade. The stands roared with approval. The Imperial Box. Up above. 3 chairs. Elder Song Gyung-chol in the center. To the right, a representative of the Iron Peak Dominion. To the left, an empty chair. No, not empty. A woman was sitting in it. Ihyeong didn't recognize her.
a dark hooded cloak, her face in shadow. But the pearl in his spine twitched, strongly. This woman was more powerful than anyone in the arena, more powerful than Charon, more powerful than the Elder. Ihyeong pushed the thought aside. Later. Right now, the arena. The ringmaster stepped into the center. He read the rules. 5 on 5. A fight to the surrender or loss of consciousness. Death is permitted but not encouraged. 2 substitutions. The final match will be captain versus captain if the score is tied. The imperial scrolls above the arena lit up. 2 columns. On the left, Azure Fang. Fighter ranks. A+. On the right, the Break Guild. FFF. The stands burst into laughter again. 5 A's against 5 F's. It's not even funny. It's sad. Break's first 5 stepped onto the sand. Nam Taeju. An old man with one leg, wearing a wooden prosthesis. An archer with one eye missing. A spear woman on prosthetics. 2 swordsmen from the first squad. All F rank according to the scrolls. Opposing them were 5 Fangs fighters. Each A rank. Blue armor. Polished movements. Professionals. The gong sounded. The fight began and ended quickly. Nam Taeju lasted 30 seconds. He took a flat blow to the ribs. He fell. He raised his hand. I surrender. The archer lasted 40 seconds. The swordsman 20. The spearwoman 1 minute. She was the only one to land a single strike, a sliding blow to the forearm. The A-rank fighter didn't even notice it. Then he countered, and she surrendered with a slashed eyebrow. The second swordsman surrendered without waiting for a blow. The score was 5-0. Azure Fang. The stands were yawning. Some were already getting up to leave. Boring. Predictable. The cripples lost in a crippled manner. In the Imperial box, Elder Song Gyong-chol reached for the elimination document. Chae-rin stood by the western gate. He was smiling. His copper badge glinted. The announcer called out the second group of 5. From the eastern gates, 5 men in gray cloaks emerged. Do-hae, Moo-hyun, Hae-bin, No Jong-yeon. A fighter from the senior squad with a prosthetic left arm. Scrolls above the arena. FFFFF. From the western gates, the 5 of Fang. 2A+, 3A. Stronger than the first 5. Chae-rin was saving his best fighters for the finishing blows. The gong sounded. Do-hae stepped forward. A blind 16-year-old boy with a sword forged from remelted shovels, reforged 3 times by Hae-bin and coated with Ihyeong's alchemical compound. His empty eye sockets were closed. His head was tilted slightly. He was listening. 5 streams of chi before him. 2 heavy ones. A+. Bronze bells. 3 lighter ones. A. Copper bells. Do-hae smiled. His first time in the arena. His first time in front of 15,000 spectators. The smile of a blind boy from the Quarter of Ashes. He struck. The first A+ fighter saw the F-ranked blind teenager vanish from his spot. He didn't move. He vanished. He reappeared an elbow's length away. The sword struck flat into the solar plexus. Not a chopping blow. Stunning. The A+ fighter doubled over. Knees in the sand. Loss of consciousness. 3 seconds. The stands fell silent. No murmur. No gasp. Just silence. The silence of 15,000 throats. The scrolls above the arena flashed. Do-hae's rank. F. Still an F. The Imperial amulets still displayed an F. And the A+ fighter lay face down in the sand. The second A+ fighter attacked. Furiously, quickly. A double-bladed sword. A series of 6 strikes. Do-ha dodged each one without moving from the spot. Just his torso. Just shifts in position. The blades passed within a finger's breadth of his skin. He felt every single one. On the 7th strike, Do-hae countered. From bottom to top. The blade sliced through the chestplate strap. The armor fell apart. The fighter jumped back. Too late. Do-hae was already upon him. A blow to the temple with the hilt. A second one on the sand. Moo-hyun didn't wait. He entered the fray at the same time as Dohei, a legless spearman on bone prostheses, a spear forged from rebar by Haben. He didn't run. He strode, heavily, steadily. Each step of the prosthesis into the sand was like a hammer blow. 3 A-rank fighters surrounded him. Standard tactics. A triangle. A simultaneous attack from 3 sides. Muhyun swung his spear. 1 swing. Horizontal. The chi from the knee stumps technique passed through the prostheses, through his legs, through his torso, through his arms, through the spear, and erupted as a wave. The 3 A-rank fighters were sent flying 10 steps away from him, simultaneously, like leaves in the wind. 2 lost consciousness midair. The third dropped to one knee. He raised his head. He saw a legless cripple on bone crutches walking toward him. Step, step, step. He surrendered. Haebin and But Jongyun and the 5th fighter stood in the arena and didn't budge. They didn't have to. Dohei and Muhyun finished it off together. The score was 5-5. 15,000 people were silent. Scrolls above the arena. F, 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 F. 5 Fs had defeated 2 A pluses and 3 As. The amulets hadn't lied. The scrolls hadn't lied. F had defeated A+. It was impossible. Elder Song-Young Chol slowly withdrew his hand from the liquidation document. The woman in the dark cloak in the 3rd seat leaned forward. Her hood shifted slightly. Ihyeong saw her. A young face. Cold eyes. She wasn't looking at the arena. She was looking at the scrolls. At the numbers that wouldn't change. F. She saw what all of Sonryeon saw, and did not understand it any more than the rest of Sonryeon. But there was something else in her incomprehension. Not shock. Recognition. Like a person who sees a ghost and realizes that ghosts exist. Chaerin stood by the western gate. A brass badge on his belt. No smile. His face was pale. His fingers were clenched around the hilt of his sword. The referee stepped into the center of the arena. He announced the final match. The score was 5-5. Captain versus captain. From the western gate, Son Chaerin, rank S. From the eastern gate, Son Ihyeong, rank F. Chaerin stepped onto the sand. 200 paces of sand between them. Chaerin on the left. Silver cloak. Blue armor. The azure fang sword with the Sun Clan's crest engraved on the hilt. S rank. Ihyeong on the right. Gray cloak. No armor. No sword. 3 fingers on his left hand. 3 fingers and 2 stumps on his right hand. F according to the scrolls. The scrolls burned above the arena. S versus F. 15,000 pairs of eyes. Silence. Not a single person in the stands moved. 5 minutes ago, they had seen how F-rank cripples had wiped out the elite top 30 of the registry. Now they didn't know what to expect. The world had ceased to be predictable. Chaerin stepped into the center of the arena. Slowly. Confidently. S-rank isn't just a number. It's the density of chi. Pressure. When an S-rank fighter walks on the sand sinks not because of weight, but from the field. Ihyeong could feel that pressure on his skin. The pearl in his spine tingled. Chaerin stopped 20 paces away. He looked at his cousin. His face was no longer pale. It was composed. Vicious. He understood everything. He understood that the top 5 had lost on purpose. He understood that he'd been lured into a trap. He understood that 15,000 people had witnessed his guild being humiliated, and that this disgrace had already been recorded in the Imperial Scrolls forever. Chaerin said he didn't know how Ihyeong had done it, that he didn't know what trick he'd used, but that tricks don't work against S-rank. Ihyeong remained silent. Chaerin raised his sword. S-rank chi enveloped the blade in a blue glow. The air around the sword crackled. The sand beneath their feet began to melt into glass. This was S-rank power, the real thing. Not a number on an amulet, a physical phenomenon. Pressure that shatters bones from 10 steps away. Ihyeong raised his right hand. 3 fingers and 2 stumps. No weapon. No glow. No pressure. An F on the scrolls. Chaerin attacked. Quickly. S rank. a distance of 20 paces. He covered it in half a second. The sword sliced through the air diagonally, a strike that would have cleaved an A-rank fighter in two, armor and all. Ihyeong shifted. By half a step, the blade whizzed past. Chaerin spun around. Second strike, horizontal. Ihyeong crouched. The blade swept over his head. It snipped off a strand of hair. Third, fourth, fifth. Chaerin struck like a machine. An S-rank series of strikes, each one capable of killing. Each one missed. By a hair's breadth. By a finger's width. By a quarter of an inch. Ihyeong didn't dodge. He moved within Chaerin's attacks like water within rocks. Not faster, more precisely. 10 months ago, he wouldn't have been able to do this. A B+ rank doesn't allow you to evade an S rank. But Ihyeong wasn't evading based on rank. He was evading with knowledge. 3 years in the abyss, 1,000 fights. He knew how the human body moved better than any swordmaster in this arena. He knew where the blade would go before the hand even began to move. He read Chaerin's body like an open book. His cousin. They'd trained together since childhood. Ihyeong knew every stance he took, every combo, every habit. Chaerin always dropped his right shoulder before the third strike of a series. Always. Since he was 12. The 15th strike. Chaerin stopped. Heavy breathing. Sweat on his forehead. 15 S-rank strikes, and not a single one had landed on the F-rank cripple with 3 fingers. The stands were silent, holding their breath. Chaerin looked at Ihyeong, at his face. Calm, steady, effortless, sweatless, as if he were standing still while the swords flew past on their own. Chaerin said it was impossible. Ihyeong replied. His first words in the arena. He said that Chaerin was still dropping his right shoulder before the third strike, just like when he was 12. Chaerin's face twitched. That blow was stronger than any sword. Not to the body, to his pride, to his certainty that S-rank meant invincibility. Ihyeong had just shown the entire arena that he could read him like a child. Chaerin screamed, for the first time in the entire fight. Not words, a sound, a roar. Chi exploded around him. An S-rank burst. Full. Uncontrolled. The sand around him shot up like a wall. The pressure crashed down on the arena like a hammer. In the stands, people were pressed into their seats. Someone shouted. Someone clutched their chest. An S-rank burst in an open arena, a forbidden technique, dangerous for spectators. Chaerin didn't care. He struck. Not with his sword. With chi. A wave of blue energy from the core through the sword. The Azure Fang technique. The shattering stream. An A rank would die. A B rank would lose a limb. Ihyeong raised both hands. 5 fingers on his left hand. On his right, 3 fingers and 2 stumps. Chi surged from both palms simultaneously. Not blue. Not gold. Black. Black light. That very light. From the fractures. From the cracks. From the source the order had sealed off 1,000 years ago. The 2 waves met in the center of the arena. Blue and black. The blue was more powerful. S versus B+. The math wasn't in Ihyeong's favor. But the black one was different. It didn't collide with the blue one. It passed right through it. Like water through a sieve. The blue wave dissipated. It scattered into sprays of chi that sizzled on the sand. The black wave reached Chaerin. It didn't strike. It enveloped him, like fog. Chaerin froze. The sword in his hand trembled. The scrolls above the arena flickered. Chaerin's rank, S, S-, A+, A. The number was falling. Before the eyes of 15,000, before the eyes of the elder, before the eyes of the woman in the dark cloak. Chi was draining from Chaerin, not into Ihyeong, into the fracture, into the cracks of the world. The core, which had drawn power from the wholeness of his body his entire life, was now losing it because standing beside him was a man through whom the world had remembered how a true flow works. Chaerin fell to one knee. A-, B+. His rank continued to fall. The sword slipped from his hands. The seals wouldn't hold. The power was draining away.
Not forever, just for now. As long as Ihyeong was nearby, as long as the black current from the breaches pressed down on the core and showed it that it was a parasite, not a source. Ihyeong approached. Charon was on his knees, rank B on the scrolls, formerly S. Sweat, trembling, eyes wide open. He didn't understand, couldn't understand. He'd been taught that the core was everything,
That the integrity of the body was strength. That cripples were trash. And trash stood before him, and his rank was melting like snow. Ihyeong leaned down. Slowly. He extended his right hand. 3 fingers and 2 stumps. Carefully. He unhooked the copper badge from Charon's belt. That very one. His mother had embroidered it with blue thread when he was 7. Charon had worn it for 10 months. Like a trophy. Like proof of victory. Ihyeong straightened up. He put the badge in his pocket. He looked at Charon from head to toe. He didn't say a word. He turned and walked toward the eastern gate. Silence behind him. 15,000 throats, not a single sound. Then a sound. One. Not a scream. Not a roar. A clap. Someone clapped. 1 person in the stands. Then a second. A third. 10. 100. 1,000. The Sonryeon Arena roared. The Imperial Scrolls were updated at midnight. The Shatter Guild. Rank 23. Formerly the Azure Fang's rank. Azure Fang. Rank 98. A drop of 75 points for a single defeat. Such are the rules of the registry. A loss in a public arena costs more than any contract. Sonryeon didn't sleep. The taverns were buzzing. The tea houses were buzzing. The guild barracks were buzzing. Everyone was talking about one thing. The blind F rank who took down 2 A+ fighters. The legless cripple who tossed 3 A rankers around like rag dolls. The head of the Cripples Guild who knocked an S rank fighter down to B rank with his bare hands. The amulets showed F. The scrolls showed F. But F defeated S. The world had been turned upside down. Ihyeong wasn't celebrating. He sat in the quarters barracks and tallied the casualties. There were none. The top 5 had surrendered without serious injuries. Scratches. Bruises. A cut eyebrow on the spearwoman. Trivial stuff. The chain of debt hadn't tightened. Not a single one of the 147 breakers was injured. Ihyeong exhaled. For the first time in 30 days. Mukien stood by the door. He said 14 letters had arrived. Overnight. 14 clans. All are asking to have their children accepted into the Fracture Guild. 3 clans from the top 100 of the register. Ihyeong said to deal with that later. Something else first. The woman in the box. The dark cloak. The 3rd seat. The Pearl reacted more strongly to her than to Charon. Muhyun said he'd looked into it. The 3rd seat in the Imperial box. A seat for a special representative. A person appointed personally by the Empress Regent. Ihyeong asked who she was. Muhyun replied that he didn't know. No one knows. She appeared in the box before the fight and disappeared afterward. No name, no clan. No rank on her amulet. The Elder's amulet next to her showed nothing. Not an F, not SSS. Emptiness. As if a hole in reality, not a human being, were sitting there. Ihyeong remained silent. Emptiness on the amulet. He had seen this once before, in the abyss, in the last 24 hours. When the archivist of the Bone Era was dying before him. His amulet showed emptiness. Because the archivist existed beyond the system of the cores, beyond the registry, beyond the millennia-old superstructure. The woman in the box belonged to the same category. From beyond the boundaries. In the morning, a messenger arrived. Not from the guild. Not from the empire. In a white cloak without an emblem, on a white horse, with a white scroll. He rode up to the quarters gates and laid the scroll on the ground in front of Ihyeong. Not in his hands, on the ground, like an offering. Then he turned and rode away, without saying a word. Ihyeong picked up the scroll. White paper. A white seal. White ink on a white background. The text was visible only when light fell on it at a certain angle. Ihyeong turned the paper toward the sun. One line, in imperial cursive. We have waited 1,000 years. We will wait no longer. No signature. No name. A white seal with a pattern that Ihyeong recognized from the pearl's archival memory. A circle. Inside the circle, a crystal. Inside the crystal, emptiness. The order of the pure core. Ihyeong rolled up the scroll, put it in his pocket. His expression did not change. Inside the pearl pulsed with unease, not with pain, but as a warning. The order knew. It had seen the black current in the arena. It had seen Charon's rank plummet under the influence of the force they had destroyed 1,000 years ago. They saw it, and realized that the fracture system had returned. Ihyeong knew this would happen. He'd known it from day one, from the moment the archivist pressed the pearl into his spine. Every step had led to this. Every fracture activated, every victory, every number raised in the registry. It was all there to see. It all left traces. And whoever up there was watching. Ihyeong gathered the four of them. He told them, not everything, just the gist. There is a power older than the cores. He carries it. The order that destroyed this power 1,000 years ago now knows it has returned. They will come. Not mercenaries, not inspectors, not Charon. Those who stand behind the entire system. Those who built the registry. Those who decided 1,000 years ago that broken people are unworthy of power. Muyeon asked when. Ihyeong replied that he didn't know. Soon. Dohae was silent. Then he said he'd been hearing it. Since this morning. A sound. Not on the ground, in the sky. High up. Like a bell. But not bronze and not copper. Hollow. The sound of emptiness. Dohae raised his head toward the ceiling. His empty eye sockets were turned upward. He said the sound was getting closer, slowly, but it was getting closer. Ihyeong placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. He said he knew. Haebin stood by the wall. Her only good eye was fixed on Ihyeong. She didn't ask what to do. She asked how many prosthetics were needed. Ihyeong looked at her scorched face, at her only arm, at the eye that was burning. He replied that as many as she could manage.
Ihyeong wrote on a piece of paper, "I'll forge what's needed." Ihyeong nodded. Then he stepped out of the barracks. He stood on the roof. He looked down at the quarter from above. 147 people with burning fractures. 23 prosthetics. The alchemy workshop. The workshop. The training ground. The underground power node. Number 23 in the Continental Registry. 10 months ago, this had been a dumping ground for cripples, where rotten rice was brought. Ihyeong took a copper badge out of his pocket. His mother had embroidered one just like it with blue thread. This one was made of copper, worn, with a scratch from Charon's belt. Ihyeong clenched it in his right hand. 3 fingers and 2 stumps. The badge fit into his incomplete fist. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Order of the Pure Core was preparing. Somewhere in the palace, the Empress Regent was reading the dossier of the Overseer of the Quarter of Ashes. Somewhere, Charon sat in the empty hall of the demoted of the guild and staring at the wall. But all that was beyond the wall. And here was the quarter. His people. His breaks. His guild. Number 23. Ihyeong tucked the badge into his pocket. He climbed down from the roof. He went to the workshop. Work wouldn't wait. The next day brought 11 more letters from the clans, and one more, unsigned, unsealed. A single word on white paper in black ink. Soon. The regional qualifiers for the Continental Guild Tournament were to be held 3 months after the arena battle. It had been 13 months since his exile. Ihyeong had made the most of every single day. 540 breaks had been activated. His personal rank had risen to A. The Break Guild was ranked 41st after a series of contracts and 2 public victories over guilds in the second half of the top 100. 41st place. Enough to qualify for the regional qualifiers. The qualifiers took place in Sonryeon. 4 guilds from the capital district, Fracture, Azure Fang in 98th place,
The Steel Dawn Guild was in 37th place. The Stone Root Guild was in 44th. 2 would advance to the Continental Tournament. 2 would be eliminated. Ihyeong wasn't looking at Steel Dawn or Stone Root. He was looking at Azure Fang. Chae-rin had regained his rank, though not fully, S-. The black current from the fractures didn't destroy his core permanently. It weakened it.
But Chae-rin trained like a man possessed for 3 months. He regained his strength. Almost. And he brought reinforcements. 4 fighters from the Red Mountain Dominion, contract mercenaries, 2A+, 2A. Technically, this was a violation. Contract fighters aren't allowed to represent the guild in tournaments. But Chae-rin had registered them as permanent members a week before the tryouts. The paperwork was in order. The seals were in order. Elder Song Gyeong-chol took care of it. Ihyeong knew. The caravan leader reported it. It didn't matter. 4 mercenaries didn't change the odds. The situation was simple. The break was stronger than Azure Fang. Not according to the registry's numbers, but in terms of actual strength. In 13 months, Do-hae had risen to SS under the old system. He could hear from a kilometer away. He could distinguish ranks down to the 100th of a fraction. He could fight 3 S-rank fighters at once and win. Moo-yeon wore new generation prosthetics that Haben had modified 4 times. Consistently S+. His spear could pierce a fortress wall. Ihyeong brewed potions that hadn't existed for 1,000 years. Her brews, the doubling of the flow, had become stable. 12 minutes of absolute power for each fighter. Haben, 120 prosthetics, 12 siege mechanisms, and something new. A prosthetic for Ihyeong, his right hand. 2 fingers made of abyss bone and imperial steel. She'd been working on them for 3 months, in secret. She hadn't told Ihyeong. She brought them the morning before the selection. She placed them on the table. 2 fingers, the ring finger and the little finger, with chi channels, with joints that moved just like real ones. Ihyeong looked at them, then at Haben. She stood there, waiting. Her single eye, a scarred face, the hand that had spent 3 months forging what was meant to become part of his body. Ihyeong took the prosthetics. He pressed them against the stumps. Chi from the fractures flowed into the channels. The fingers twitched. 2 bony fingers. They moved. Not like living ones. Slightly slower, slightly stiffer. But they moved. Ihyeong clenched his right hand into a fist. A full fist. For the first time in 13 months. 5 fingers. 3 living ones and 2 bony ones. He didn't say thank you. He looked at Haben, and she understood everything without words. Regional qualifiers. Sonryeon Arena. 30,000 spectators. Twice as many as at the screening. Word of the Shatter Guild had spread across the continent. People were traveling from neighboring dominions to see the empties who fought like SS-ranked warriors. The Imperial Box. 5 seats were occupied. Elder Song Gyeong-chol. 3 representatives from the dominions, and the 5th seat, a woman. The very same one. A dark cloak, a hood. This time, Ihyeong knew who she was. The caravan leader had found out. Empress Regent Han So-ryeon. In person. Not a representative. Her. For the first time in 8 years, she had left the palace for the tournament. Ihyeong saw the 5th seat and realized that the stakes had gone up. This wasn't a regional qualifier. It was a showcase. The first match, Break against Stone Root. The 44th ranked guild. Tough fighters. 5 A rankers. 3 B+. 2 Bs. Fair. Not underhanded. Professionals. Ihyeong fielded his second string. Not Do-hae. Not Moo-hyun. Fighters whom Moo-hyun had trained for 9 months. The outcasts from the quarter. Those the world had written off.
One-armed No Jong-yeon.
The one-eyed archer. The spearwoman with prosthetic limbs. The swordsman with a prosthetic arm. The 5th with a shattered spine supported by a frame made of abyss bone. Scrolls. FFFFF versus AAA. B+. B+. The stands didn't laugh. Not this time. Everyone remembered what had happened to Azure Fang. The gong. The fight lasted 4 minutes. But No Jong-yeon took down the first A-rank fighter in 30 seconds, with one hand. His right, his only one. The strike was so fast that the referee didn't see it. He saw only the result, an A-rank fighter lying on the sand, unconscious. The one-eyed archer took out two opponents with arrows from 50 paces away. He didn't kill them. He pinned their shoulder guards to the ground. They couldn't get up. The spearwoman and the swordsman finished off the rest in a minute. The score was 5-0. A clean victory. Without Do-hae, without Moo-hyun, without Ihyeong. The second string. Those whom even in the quarter were considered reserves. F rank according to the scrolls. Stone Root was out. The stands were silent. Then they erupted. 30,000 voices. In the box, Empress Regent Han Soryeon pulled back her hood. For the first time in 8 years, someone other than the courtiers saw her face. Young, 32 years old, cold eyes. She looked out at the arena, at the 5 voids in gray cloaks, at the scrolls displaying an F, at the bodies of the A-rank fighters on the sand. She turned to the elder. She spoke a single sentence. Ihyeong didn't hear it, but he saw the elder Song Gyong-chol's face turn gray. The second fight, the Breaker versus Azure Fang. Chae-rin entered the arena first, S-. A silver cloak, no copper badge on his belt. The belt was bare. His face was stony. Behind him were 10 fighters, the best, including 4 mercenaries. Ihyeong exited through the eastern gate. Behind him were 10. Do-hae, Moo-hyun, Hae-bin, No Jong-yeon, and 6 more, in gray cloaks, barefoot on the sand. Ihyeong looked at Chae-rin from 200 paces across the arena. His cousin, the man who took everything from him. His name, his inheritance, his fiancée, rank, his right hand. 13 months ago, in this very courtyard, he'd said that the registry wouldn't accept a cripple. Ihyeong raised his right hand. 5 fingers, 3 alive, 2 bony. He clenched it into a fist. The gong. Ihyeong didn't stretch it out. He didn't tactically forfeit the first 5. He didn't play the game. He nodded. Do-hae stepped forward. Moo-hyun stepped forward. Hae-bin raised her hand, and a mechanism fired 3 prosthetic projectiles into the ground in front of Fang's formation. Sand flew up. The formation scattered. Do-hae stepped into the cloud of sand as if into water. He didn't need his eyes. He didn't need light. He could hear. 10 streams of chi, 10 targets. The first mercenary fell a second later. The second, 2 seconds later. Muhan thrust his spear into the ground. A wave of chi traveled through the sand and emerged beneath the feet of 4 fighters. They were sent flying. 2 lost consciousness midair. 2 landed and were immediately struck by No Jong-yeon and the archer. 6 of Fang's fighters lay on the sand in 8 seconds. 4 remained. 3 A ranks and Chae-rin, S rank minus. Chae-rin stood there, watching. The 3 A ranks stood nearby. They had seen 6 men fall in 8 seconds. They had seen the scrolls. F. One of them dropped his weapon. He turned and walked toward the western gate. He surrendered. The second followed him. The third looked at Chae-rin. He looked at Do-hae, who stood in the center of the arena with a blood-stained sword. He looked at Moo-hyun, who hadn't raised his spear for a second strike because there. The third laid his weapon on the sand and raised his hands. Chae-rin stood alone. S-, silver cloak, alone in the arena, against 10 voids in gray cloaks. He looked at Ihyeong. Ihyeong was standing by the eastern gate. Not in the arena. He hadn't come out. There was no need. His team had finished without him. Chae-rin lowered his head. The sword in his hand was trembling, not from chi, from his fingers which wouldn't obey him. He thrust the sword into the sand, raised his hand. I surrender. 30,000 voices, a roar. The scrolls updated in that very second. The Break Guild advances to the Continental Tournament. Azure Fang is eliminated. Break's ranking after the qualifiers, 23rd place confirmed. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing happened afterward.
When the stands were roaring and the fighters were leaving the arena. When Che-rin was kneeling in the sand next to his sword, still stuck in the sand. And Hang stepped into the arena. Alone. In a gray cloak, he walked past his own people. Past Dohei. Past Muhyun. Past Haebin, who was watching him go. He approached Che-rin. Stood before him. Che-rin raised his head. His eyes were red. Not from tears, but from burst blood vessels after releasing his chi. He looked older. Older than he had 13 months ago. Older than his 26 years. Ihyeong took a copper badge out of his pocket. He placed it on the sand in front of Che-rin. Che-rin looked at the badge, then at Ihyeong. He didn't understand. Ihyeong said the badge wasn't meant to be taken. It was meant to be returned. Here, on this very sand. In full view of the same people who had watched him being led into exile. This wasn't revenge. It was calculation. Every step from the very first day had led here. Every break, every prosthesis, every potion, every contract, every entry in the registry. Not to humiliate Che-rin, but so the world could see what it means to be empty. Ihyeong turned around. He walked toward the eastern gate. Che-rin remained on his knees. The badge lay before him in the sand. Copper on white sand. The arena roared. Ihyeong walked out through the gate. Muhyun was waiting outside. Behind him, a formation, not 10, 540. The entire shattered guild. They stood behind the arena wall in gray cloaks. Those whom the world had cast out. The lame, the armless, the blind, the deaf, the burned, the broken. 540 people who 13 months ago had sat in the mud waiting for death. They stood in formation, in perfect order, in silence. Ihyeong walked past the ranks. He looked each one in the face. Then he stopped. He turned to face them. 540 pairs of eyes, for those who had eyes. Empty eye sockets for those who did not. Ihyeong announced that the Shattered Guild had qualified for the Continental Tournament. The ranks did not shout. They did not roar. Silence. Then Muhyun struck the ground with his spear. One blow, hollow, heavy. Dohei struck his sword against its scabbard. Haebin struck her prosthetic limb with her hammer. Ihyeong stamped her foot. 540 people, all at once. A single strike. The ground shook. Ihyeong stood before them. His right hand clenched into a fist. 3 living fingers and 2 bony ones. Behind him lay the arena. Beyond the arena, Sonryeon. Beyond Sonryeon, the palace where the Empress Regent was now issuing her command. Beyond the palace, the mountains. Beyond the mountains, the order of the pure core. Beyond the order, 1,000 years of lies. Ihyeong turned to face the horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the clouds, Dohei heard a sound. The sound of an empty bell. Closer than yesterday. Ihyeong heard it too. Not with his ears. With the pearl. The first archon of the Order of the Pure Core. He hadn't come down from the mountain for 1,000 years. Now he is coming down. Ihyeong gazed at the horizon. 540 breaks behind him. Number 23 in the registry. His right hand clenched into a fist. He murmured quietly, "Let them come." The regional qualifiers for the Continental Guild Tournament took place 3 months after the battle in the arena. 13 months since his exile. Ihyeong had made use of every day, every hour, every minute that the pearl allowed him to stay awake. 540 fractures activated. 540 people whom the world had broken. 540 cracks through which a power older than the Empire returned. His personal rank had risen to A, not according to the registry. The registry still showed F, under the old system, the one that counted not the integrity of the body, but its wounds. A rank, the very same rank he'd returned with from the abyss 3 years ago. The very same rank that had been taken from him because of 2 fingers and 3 vertebrae. The circle was complete. He was A rank again. But the path to this A rank had been different. Not through the core.
through the fractures of 540 people who depended on him, and he on them. The Fracture Guild ranked 41st in the registry after a series of contracts and 2 public victories over guilds from the second 50. 271 positions in 13 months. From the very bottom. From number 312. From the dumping ground for cripples. To 41st place among the 312 guilds of the continent. A number that blazed in the imperial scrolls and kept half the Council of 12 awake at night. The selection took place in Sonryon, 4 guilds from the capital district. Break at 41st, Azure Fang at 98th. The Steel Dawn Guild was in 37th place. The Stone Root Guild was in 44th. 2 would advance to the Continental Tournament. 2 would be eliminated.
Ihyeong wasn't looking at Steel Dawn or Stone Root. He was looking at Azure Fang, at number 98, at Charon. Charon had regained his rank. Not completely. S-. The black current from the fractures hadn't shattered his core forever. It had weakened it. It had shown that the core was a superstructure, not a foundation. But Charon hadn't learned his lesson. He'd trained like a man possessed for 3 months. He'd regained his rank. Almost. He'd recruited 4 fighters from the Red Mountain Dominion, 2 A+, 2 As. He registered them as permanent members a week before the tryouts. Elder Song Young-chol signed the papers. Ihyeong knew all of this. The caravan driver whose brother he'd treated with Ihyeong potions for a chronic cough. Information flowed into the quarter like water through cracks in a wall. Through the breaches. Everything through the breaches. The morning before the selection, Hae-bin came to the barracks. Early. Before dawn. Ihyeong hadn't slept. He was sitting on the floor studying a map of the arena. Hae-bin placed a bundle on the table. Silently. Ihyeong unwrapped it. 2 fingers. The ring finger and the little finger. The bone of the abyss. Imperial steel. The hinges were thinner than a needle. 5 channels for chi. Each channel was carved with a precision that Ihyeong hadn't even seen in the blueprints of the pearl. Hae-bin had done better than the archival memory. Better than a 1,000-year-old specimen. Ihyeong looked at the prosthetics. 2 fingers. A trifle for a whole person. A whole world for a cripple. He looked at Hae-bin. She was standing by the wall. 1 good eye. A scorched face. 1 hand. The hand that had secretly forged these fingers for 3 months. After her regular work. After 120 prosthetics for the guild. After 12 siege mechanisms. At night, when everyone was asleep. She hadn't told Ihyeong. She hadn't asked for measurements. She'd taken them while he slept. From the imprint of his hand in the clay by the furnace. Engineering precision. Ihyeong took the prosthetics. He pressed them against the stumps of his right hand. The chi from the fractures in his vertebrae flowed through his wrist, through his living fingers, through the stumps, and into the channels of the bone prostheses. 2 fingers twitched. Ihyeong bent them, straightened them, bent them again. Slightly slower than his living ones, slightly stiffer. But they obeyed him. He clenched his right hand into a fist. A full fist. 5 fingers. 3 living ones. 2 bony ones. For the first time in 13 months. For the first time since that dawn when Chae-rin slowly pulled the copper badge from his bandaged hand and the 2 stumps twitched with phantom pain. Ihyeong clenched and unclenched his fist. Once. Twice. 3. A feeling of fullness. Not wholeness. Something else. Better. A fist made of the living and the dead. Of the flesh and bone of the abyss. Of what was and what they had made. He looked at Hae-bin. She was looking at his hand. At her work. Her eyes shone. Ihyeong didn't say thank you. He held out his hand. His right hand. With 2 bony fingers. Ha-bin looked at the outstretched palm. Then she raised her only hand. Her left. She placed it in his right. His 5 fingers closed around her palm, 3 living ones and 2 bony ones. A second. 2. Ha-bin pulled her hand away. She turned away. She left. Ihyeong heard her walk down the hallway, her steps slightly faster than usual. He looked at his fist. He unclenched it. He looked at his palm. Then he withdrew his hand and returned to the arena map.
Work wouldn't wait. Sonryon Arena, Morning. 30,000 spectators. Twice as many as at the inspection 3 months ago. Rumors of the Shatter Guild had spread across the entire Hyunju continent. Caravans of spectators were arriving from neighboring dominions, from the Black Moon Dominion, from the Iron Peak Dominion, from the Red Mountain Dominion. People wanted to see the empty ones. Those very ones. The cripples who fight like SS-ranked warriors. The blind boy who hears the world. The legless spearman on bone prostheses. The one-armed engineer with a scarred face. They had become legends. Not because Ihyeong wanted it that way. Because the world loves stories about those who rose from their knees, especially when the world itself had brought them to their knees. The Imperial Lodge. 5 chairs. Elder Song Gyong-chol in the center, his face stony. Next to him, 3 representatives of the dominions, and the 5th chair. Ihyeong saw it even before he entered the arena. The pearl in his spine rang out. Not like it had with Chetan. Louder. Deeper. Like a bell in an empty temple. The 5th chair. A dark cloak. A hood. But this time Ihyeong knew. Empress Regent Han Soryeon.
In person. Not a representative, not an envoy. Her. 32 years old. 8 years on the throne. For the first time, she had left the palace for a tournament. For the first time in 8 years, anyone other than the courtiers and the Council of 12. The caravan driver had found out. His 3rd brother served in the palace guard. Insomnia potions. Information is more valuable than silver. Ihyeong looked at the 5th chair and realized, this isn't a regional qualifier. It's a trial by combat. The Empress has come to evaluate not the guild, but him. The man who, in 13 months, raised a bunch of cripples from the bottom of the barrel to 41st place in the registry. The man whose fighters display an F on their amulets and kill A+ opponents. The man who broke the system without ever leaving the Quarter of Ashes. She wants to understand. Is he a friend or a threat? An ally or an enemy? A tool or a problem? Ihyeong entered through the eastern gate. 10 men followed him, in gray cloaks without emblems, barefoot on the sand. 30,000 voices fell silent. No laughter, no condescension. The silence of anticipation. The world already knew that an F wasn't an F. That the gray cloaks weren't rags. That bare feet on the sand could be made of the bone of the abyss. The first battle. The breach against the stone root. The 44th rank guild. Strong, honest. 10 fighters from A to B. Years of training. The academy. Everything by the rules. Everything according to the registry. Yehen fielded the second line. Not Dohae. Not Moo-hyun. Not the best. Those whom Moo-hyun had trained for 9 months. The empty ones from the quarter. One-armed No Jong-yeon. An archer missing his left eye. A spearwoman with prosthetic legs. A swordsman with a prosthetic left arm. The 5th fighter with a framework of abyss bone on his shattered spine. Scrolls. F, 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 F. Against AAA. B+. B+. 30,000 spectators didn't laugh. They were silent. The gong. The fight lasted 4 minutes. But Jong-yeon emerged first. 16 years old. 4 months of training. 1 arm. The right. He held the sword with a grip not found in any of the Academy's textbooks. Moo-hyun invented the grip. For a one-armed fighter. The center of gravity is shifted toward the wrist. The blade is an extension of the forearm. The first A-rank fighter of the stone root struck with a standard combo. 3 strikes. Vertical, horizontal, diagonal, textbook. But Jong-yeon let all 3 pass right by him. He didn't dodge. He let them pass. He stood so that the blades passed mere centimeters from his skin. Then he countered. 1 strike. From bottom to top. The hilt to the chin. And rank fighter was flung off the sand. Legs in the air. Back in the sand. Unconscious. 30 seconds. 30,000 throats exhaled in unison. The archer was missing his left eye. He'd fired from 50 paces away. Not at the men. At their armor. 3 arrows. 3 shoulder guards. Pinned to the ground. Two stone root fighters were on their knees, their hands pinned to the sand, unable to move. Arrows made of abyss bone cut through imperial steel like butter. The spearwoman and the swordsman finished off the rest. In unison. Cleanly. Just like in training with Muhyeon. Step, strike. Step, strike. No unnecessary movements. No flair. Efficiency. 4 minutes. The score was 5-0. A clean victory. Without Dohae. Without Muhyeon. Without Ihyeong. The second string. The reserves.
Those whom even within the quarter weren't considered first-rate. F, according to the scrolls. Stone Root was out. The leader of Stone Root stood at the western gate and watched his team on the sand. Then he looked at the 5 gray figures at the eastern gate. 5 cripples. 5 Fs. He took off his glove, threw it onto the sand, a gesture of defeat. An old gesture, from the days when honor meant more than rank. Ihyeong noticed. He remembered. Stone Root could become an ally. Someday. In the box, Empress Regent Han Soryeon threw back her hood. For the first time in 8 years, 30,000 people saw her face. Silence fell over the arena like a stone dropped into water. A young face. 32 years old, sharp cheekbones, eyes cold and dark as winter water. She wasn't looking at the arena. She was looking at the scrolls, at the 5 letters F that had remained unchanged since the battle. Then she turned to Elder Song Gyeong-chol. She spoke a single sentence, softly. Ihyeong didn't hear the words, but he saw the elder's face turn ashen. He saw his cheek twitch. He saw his fingers clench the armrest of his chair.
Whatever she said, it was more terrifying than any order to eliminate someone. The second fight. The Breaker versus Azure Fang. Chaerin stepped into the arena first. Alone. Ahead of his team. S-. Silver cloak. Empty belt. No copper badge. Ihyeong had taken it 3 months ago. Chaerin hadn't found a replacement. Not because he couldn't, because the empty space on his belt served as a reminder. It burned. It kept him awake. Chaerin's face was stony. Not angry, not frightened. Empty. The face of a man who went into battle knowing he would lose, but he went anyway. Behind him were 10 fighters, the best that remained. 4 mercenaries from Red Mountain, 6 veterans of the Fang. Ihyeong walked out through the eastern gate. 10 followed him. Dohae, Muhyeon, Haebin, but Jonghyun, the one-eyed archer, and 5 more from the senior squad, in gray cloaks. Ihyeong looked at Chaerin across 200 paces of sand. 13 months. Dawn in the training yard. A copper badge. A bandaged arm. A livestock cart. A woman in blue silk and her fan. Every step from the guild gates to the quarter gates. Every step from the quarter to this arena. 13 months. 540 breaks.
Ihyeong his right hand. 5 fingers. 3 alive. 2 bony. He clenched it into a fist. Chaerin saw the fist. Saw the 5 fingers. 3 months ago, there were 3. His face twitched, for the first time all day. Not out of fear, out of the realization that Ihyeong continues to grow, that every day brings him something new, that it couldn't be stopped. Gong! Ihyeong didn't drag it out, didn't feign defeat, didn't play games. Enough. He nodded. Dohae stepped forward. Muhyeon stepped forward. Haebin raised her single arm, a mechanism on her wrist. 3 projectile prostheses, bone rods coated with Ihyeong alchemy. A click. 3 rods plunged into the sand in front of Fang's formation. The alchemical coating flared up, not with fire, but with dust. A cloud of sand and alchemical powder rose like a wall 3 human heights high. Fang's formation crumbled. The fighters leaped back. Reflex. The right reflex for fighting a visible enemy. The wrong reflex for fighting a blind one. Dohae stepped into the cloud. He didn't need eyes. He didn't need light. He could hear. 10 streams of chi before him. 2 heavy ones. A plus. Bronze bells. 4 medium ones. A. Copper. 4 light ones. B plus and B. Clay pots. And 1. 1 sound. S-. Not a bell. Not a pot. A cracked gong.
That's how Do-hye heard Charon. Cracked. Because 3 months ago, a black stream from the breaches had passed through his core and left a mark. Invisible. Incurable. A crack that Charon felt every time he channeled chi into his sword. Do-hye struck. The first A-plus mercenary saw a shadow in the cloud of sand. No, he didn't see it. He heard a whistle. The blade entered the temporal bone flat. Precisely. No wind-up. Like a surgical instrument. The mercenary fell. A second later, the second A-plus mercenary. He managed to raise his guard. A double block. A standard defensive stance. It would have been enough against an A-rank fighter. Not against Do-hye. The boy didn't try to break through the block. He struck at the knee, underneath the block, where the guard isn't positioned, because no textbook teaches you to strike the knee. Do-hye didn't learn from textbooks. Ihyeong taught him, and Ihyeong lost his legs and knows the value of every joint. The mercenary fell to one knee. Do-hye finished him off with the hilt to the back of the head. 2 seconds. Ihyeong didn't wait. He entered the cloud from the other side. The spear, forged from rebar by Haebin. The fourth version, lightweight, durable. With 3 channels for chi that Haebin had carved with precision down to 1/10 of a finger's width. Ihyeong thrust the spear into the ground, not at a person, into the sand. The chi from the fractures in his severed knees flowed through the prosthetics, through his body, through his arms, through the spear, and into the ground. A wave, underground, invisible. The sand beneath the 4 fighters bucked. They were sent flying. Not high, 1/2 meter. Enough to lose their footing. Enough to be in the air for 1/2 second with no chance to dodge. But Jong-yeon cut down the first one mid-air, with one hand. The one-eyed archer took out the second with an arrow to the shoulder guard, nailing him to the ground. The third and fourth landed and were struck by 2 swordsmen from the senior squad. 8 seconds. 6 Fang fighters on the sand. The cloud of dust settled. 4 remained. 3 A-rank Fang veterans, and Che Rin. They stood in the center of the arena, around the bodies. 6 people in 8 seconds. Scrolls burned above the arena. FFFFFF. 30,000 people held their breath. The first A-rank veteran looked at the bodies. He looked at Do-hye. The blind boy stood there with his sword, blood on the blade. Empty eye sockets staring straight at him, as if he could see. The veteran dropped his sword. He turned back. He walked toward the western gate. He didn't run. He walked. Slowly. With dignity. But he walked. He surrendered. The second followed him. The third looked at Charon, at the man he had fought for. He looked at Ihyeong. The legless spearman stood on his prosthetics, a spear in his hand. His face was calm, like a wall. The third veteran laid his sword on the sand. He raised his hands. He surrendered. Charon stood alone. S-, silver cloak. In the arena. 1 against 10. 30,000 spectators. The empress in the box. The elder beside the gray-faced man. Imperial scrolls with numbers that made no sense. Charon looked at Ihyeong. Ihyeong stood by the eastern gate, not in the arena. He hadn't come out. There was no need. His team had finished without him. 10 empties, 10 Fs, against the best fighters of Azure Fang. The fight lasted 8 seconds and 3 surrenders. Charon lowered his head.
His shoulders slumped. The silver cloak he'd worn for 13 months as a banner of victory over his crippled brother. The cloak that had been sewn on that day when Ihyeong was still sleeping in the infirmary. The cloak that smelled of fresh paint and a stranger's inheritance. Charon thrust his sword into the sand, hilt deep. He raised his right hand. I surrender. 30,000 voices erupted. A roar, not approval, not joy, something greater. The sound of a world that understands the rules have changed. The scrolls have been updated. The Shatter Guild advances to the Continental Tournament. Azure Fang is eliminated. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing happened afterward. When the stands were roaring, when the fighters were leaving the arena, when the judges were recording the result. Ihyeong stepped onto the sand, alone, a gray cloak, 3 living fingers and 2 bony ones on his right hand.
He walked past Do-hye. The boy turned his head at the sound of footsteps and nodded. Past Mu-hyun. The spearman took a step back. Past Hae-bin, who watched him go with her one eye and didn't move from her spot. Ihyeong walked across the arena toward Chae-rin. 200 steps.
Sand beneath his feet. A silence that over 30,000 people like a blanket. Chae-rin was kneeling next to his sword, which was stuck in the ground. His head was bowed. His silver cloak lay in the dust. He heard footsteps and looked up. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from burst blood vessels caused by the chi surge he'd used to try to strengthen himself before the fight. It was useless. Chi flowed through a crack in the core left by the black stream 3 months ago. He looked older than 26. Wrinkles around his eyes. Sunken cheeks. 13 months of hatred and fear had aged him by 10 years. Ihyeong stopped in front of him. He looked down at him, not as a victor looking down on a vanquished foe, as one human being looking at another. He took a copper badge out of his pocket. His mother had embroidered it with blue thread when he was 7. Copper. Worn. With a scratch from Charon's belt. Ihyeong had carried it for 3 months in the pocket of his gray coat. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. He placed the badge on the sand in front of Charon. Copper on white sand. A small, round disc. Meaningless to the 30,000 spectators, meaning everything to the two of them. Charon looked at the badge, then at Ihyeong. He didn't understand. Ihyeong spoke, quietly, calmly, so that only Charon could hear him. He said the badge wasn't meant to be taken. It was meant to be returned. Here, on this sand, in front of the very same people who watched as he was led into exile through the main gates. He said that every step, from the very first day in the quarter, had led here. Every activated fracture, every prosthesis, every potion, every contract, every entry in the registry. Not to humiliate Charon, not for revenge, so that the world could see what it means to be empty. That the integrity of the body is not equal to strength. That cracks do not equal weakness. That the 2,000 people who were written off and forgotten are worth more than the entire hierarchy of the registry, built on a lie dating back 1,000 years. Charon listened. His expression didn't change. Then he looked at the badge, reached out, took it, clenched it in his fist. 5 whole fingers, not a single crack, not a single fracture, an unbroken body and an empty fist. Ihyeong straightened up, turned around, walked toward the eastern gate without looking back. Just like 13 months ago, only in the other direction. A formation awaited beyond the eastern gate. Not 10, 540. The entire Fracture Guild. They had come. All of them. From the Quarter of Ash. On foot. On prosthetics. In wheelchairs. On crutches. Those who could walk led those who could not. 540 people in gray cloaks stood behind the arena wall. Those cast out by the world. The lame, the armless, the blind, the deaf, the burned. Those with shattered spines. Those with empty eye sockets. Those with stumps for hands and prosthetics for legs. The discarded, the branded, the empty, the conja. They stood in formation, straight, silent. 540 breaks. 540 cracks through which a power older than the empire flowed into the world. Ihyeong stepped out of the gate and stopped before the formation. He looked. At each one. Yoon Do-hye, 16 years old, a blind swordsman, SS under the old system, the first to be ignited. Baek Mu-hyun, 38 years old, a legless spearman, S+ on bone prostheses, commander. Ho Ui-ryeon, 29 years old, a deaf-mute herbalist, SSS, the heart of the guild. Jang Hae-bin, 22 years old, one arm, scars on her face, a plus. The one who made his fingers, Nam Tae-ju, 71 years old, an old man with one leg missing. C rank, first ally, keeper of the bones of the abyss, No Jong-yun, 16 years old, one arm, a plus. the first of the noble offspring, and another 534. Each has a name. Each has a story. Each has a break. Ihyeong knew a story. Each has a break. Ihyeong knew them all. By name, by numbers, by cracks. He said that the Fracture Guild had qualified for the Continental Tournament. The ranks did not shout. They did not roar. Silence. Heavy. Complete. The silence of people who had waited 13 months for this moment and now did not know how to process it. Then a sound. Muhan struck the ground with his spear. A single blow. Hollow. Deep. The chi flowed through his prosthetics into the earth, and the earth responded. Dohei struck his sword sheath with his sword. The clang of metal. Hebben struck her wrist prosthesis with a hammer. A clang. Ihyeong stamped her foot. Quietly. But the ground of power beneath the quarter responded. 540 people. All at once. Each in their own way. A fist against the chest. A crutch against a stone.
A prosthesis against a prosthesis.
A palm against a palm. A single strike. Simultaneous. The earth shook. The arena walls hummed. The 30,000 spectators inside fell silent because they felt the floor shift beneath their feet. Not an earthquake. Resonance. 540 fractures. Simultaneously. On the same ground, in the same formation. Ihyeong stood before the formation. His right hand clenched into a fist, 3 living fingers and 2 bony ones. His left hand hung at his side. The pearl in his spine pulsed. Warmth. Not pain. Pride. If a pearl can feel pride. In the imperial box, Consortion stood up. For the first time in 8 years, she rose from her chair in front of witnesses. 30,000 people watched as the Empress Regent rose. Elder Song Gyong-chol, sitting next to her, pressed himself against the back of his chair. She looked down, at the formation behind the arena wall, at the 540 gray cloaks, at the man before them. She uttered a single phrase, softly, but the arena heard it, because 30,000 were silent. She said, "Bring me the complete dossier on the Break Guild." Not on the Overseer, on the Guild. The servant behind her bowed and disappeared. Ihyeong heard it. He looked up at the box. At the woman who was standing there, looking down at him. Their eyes met for a second. The Empress and the Overseer. The continent's supreme ruler and an F-rank cripple from the Quarter of Ash. She didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just stared. Then she sat down. Ihyeong turned away. He looked toward the horizon, at the mountains beyond Sonryeon, at the clouds above the mountains. Dohei stood beside him. The boy raised his head. His empty eye sockets were fixed on the sky. He said quietly that the sound was getting closer. An empty bell. The one he'd been hearing for 3 months now. Closer every day. Louder every day. Something was coming down from the mountains. Ihyeong nodded. He felt the same thing. Through the pearl. Through his spine. Through the 3 fractures in his own vertebrae. The order of the pure core. 1,000 years ago, they destroyed the system of fractures, erased it from the books, from memory, from the world. They built the registry. They built the cores. They built a hierarchy where the whole were at the top and the broken were at the bottom. It worked for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, the empty ones were exiled to the quarters. For 1,000 years, the crippled were written off and forgotten. For 1,000 years, no one knew that the true source of chi was not the core, but the great fracture at the foundation of the world. A crack through which energy flows. The order sealed it off. But they didn't destroy it. And now 540 people with breaks stood in a single formation, and the earth beneath them hummed with the flow that had waited 1,000 years. Ihyeong took a white scroll out of his pocket. He read one line for the last time. "We've waited 1,000 years. We won't wait any longer." He rolled it up, put it away, looked at the formation, at his people. 540. Each one worth more than he knew. Each one bound to him by the chain of debt. Every death among them is a part of his power, forever. 540 threads. 540 vulnerabilities. And 540 reasons why he will not lose. Ihyeong turned to face the frame. 540 breaks behind him. Number 41 in the registry, soon to be higher. His right hand clenched into a fist. 3 living fingers, 2 bony ones. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the first Archon of the Order of the Pure Core was descending the mountain for the first time in 1,000 years. Ihyeong spoke quietly, so that only Dohee could hear. Let them come.